Yes.
Um, yeah, yeah, so. All the charter stuff, I worked with both, they're all, so. Yeah, so it would just be a matter of their. Yeah, yeah, they were, and there were a couple other cities as well. I mean, whether they follow up with it, I don't know, but they were done.
see what.
Even 14, which is illegal dumping, I think is pretty straightforward.
That's Mike's.
He's here, right?
He's here somewhere.
This goes back to us.
Oh, okay. Hang on, I'm just getting to. I'm trying to remember why Roman's order got pushed to here.
Was it,
In order. 1, 2,
we actually, so it's not a handicap, it's the
3.
business parking signs and,
It was tabled for some reason.
I think it was actually sent. Public safety?
No, it was tabled.
Were they gonna put other signage up and they were gonna see how that worked? Is it that one?
I don't know. It was tabled probably for the engineer. Being that it's 6:40 and we have a quorum, I'm going to call the meeting of the Ordinance Committee to order. Tuesday, March 22nd at 6:40 PM. We are awaiting the planning board, but in the meantime, we have an order that we could take up out of order if the committee would like. That would be items 14 and 15, filed by Counselor Sullivan. So moved.
Second.
On favor? Aye. And my understanding is that we have the language before us, and the maker of the order is here. And so if the maker of the order would like to say anything about the language that we have,
Yep.
Counselor Sullivan?
Yep, thank you very much. I've gone over the order. I'd like to thank Kara Cunha for the work she's done on this and the enhancements that we've been able to add to it. I'm very comfortable with it. I think it addresses both 14 and 15 together. Is that the right one? Yeah.
We took those up.
And,
Fine.
you know, having read the thing over, I'm fine with seeing it advance to the council the way it is.
Okay. Are there any other comments or questions from members of the committee, or we have Counselor Joe McGivern with us also? Are there any questions for legal? We did have a good portion of this before us.
Yep.
At the last meeting, so.
One of the main questions or hurdles that a lot of people had that I had talked to about it was the size of the penalties being rather stiff. So many people just plain not being able to pay. As I said in previous meetings, if you can't pay the fine, don't do the crime. But what we see here is now we've added a provision where if somebody does something of this gross nature and they can't afford it, they can do 7 days in the House of Correction. And I think that addresses that problem beautifully, and I'm ready to see it go forward as is.
So the only question that I had in looking it over was, what if a person is, in essence, the victim of people dumping on their property? Do you feel we have enough flexibility within the ordinance so that the victim doesn't end up being the,
Yeah, the ordinance is the way it's written and the way it's designed is you catch a person in the act of doing the dumping, and that's who you're going after. You know, for the people that are stuck right now, you know, hopefully the problem starts to disappear through an
Right.
ordinance like this.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's a good point, because we have had people that have it happening on their property, you know, so.
Right.
It's a good point to make. Thank you. Any other questions?
I would just ask if we could suspend the necessary rules and have Kara just clarify one section in here.
If that's a motion, do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Kara, I'm just looking over section 2. And I think this is the part that really does speak to who's responsible for the dumping. So can you just explain how it doesn't target or create penalties for the property owner whose lot is being dumped on?
Well, it does provide that a person whose property has been dumped on, who's issued a notice, if they refuse to clean it up within 7 days, they can be penalized through only civil proceedings, not criminal proceedings. But obviously that comes down to the discretion of the enforcing officers. And so if it's a recurring problem, you know, it's not something that has to be done. The first section allows for both criminal and civil penalties against the people who are actually doing the dumping. So, and I think, if I recall, it pretty closely mirrors. I mean, our current ordinances already have similar provisions. You know, so while that is in there, it's not necessarily something that would have to happen. It would be up to the discretion of the enforcing officers, so.
So the idea is that if it's a random occurrence, they wouldn't be penalized because that would be more like someone else dumping on their property. But if they become habitual problem property, then we have the ability to enforce the law against them.
I mean, I think if, you know, I know we've had examples of trash in alleyways being attributed to businesses along the alleyway, repeated, you know, so situations like that, if a landlord was allowing tenants to just, you know, dump furniture or something there, then those are the types of situations that provision might be used for. And the penalties under that, like I said, are civil, they're not criminal, and they can be up to 3 times the amount that the city spends if we have to clean it up. So.
Okay.
Thank you. Counselor McGivern?
To the city solicitor, if I could. Kara, the language before us, we talked about the last meeting, was to address people who do the illegal dumping, not people who are dumped on. And I realize some people allow trash to stay on their property, or some landlords don't enforce what their tenants do. But there are many property owners out there, and we have a history, and we talked about this at great detail, who have been dumped on, and the city has cited them for not cleaning up their property. And yet the city has done very little in terms of looking for people who are doing the illegal dumping. So is the language been adapted to that, or is it, as you just stated, are we going to penalize people who are the victim?
Well, I mean, it's 2 options. You could delete that section if you want. I think under our current ordinances, we already have the authority to cite property owners.
Without this language?
Right, so I don't think, if you wanted to delete that section, that would be fine.
I will not vote in favor of this unless that section is deleted. We talked at great length at the last meeting about this, and there's so many people out there who've not only been victimized by people dumping on their property, but then we turn around and the city has cited them for not cleaning it up.
Just to be clear, Counselor, we're talking about section 2?
It's section
I only
2.
read this for the first time this evening, like I think everyone, but I believe it's section 2.
So it's somewhat redundant anyway?
I mean, I think you could, if you wanted to just target the people who are actually doing the dumping, that would be fine. You could take out section 2 and would just have to change some of the other violation sections that refer, but that's fine. This was the language that was in the other special acts,
Okay.
but
I just think we're trying to deal with making our city unfriendly to dumpers, and we all, I think, totally embrace that, but we just don't want to unintentionally create more issues for our own residents. So I think we've heard the concerns and we've heard the legal opinion that we could accomplish the greater goal, and if we eliminate section 2, we still maintain the integrity of the orders that you filed. Would you?
Let
do you
me,
s-
right now, if somebody's been victimized, all right, they're still stuck having to clean it up,
Correct.
all right? And all they have to do is take it, the worst that can happen to them is they're having to take it down to the city yard and pay $25 if it's a sofa, or $20, or if they've got their city dump card, they're allowed so many for free every year. And that's all they have to do to get rid of the problem. I think if you eliminate section 2 altogether, all right, we had the example of landlords who are just allowing their tenants, where they have multiple tenants, I'm not talking about a 2 or 3 family house where you've got 20 tenants in there, and just allowing the stuff to pile up. I mean, they know where it's coming from, and they're doing nothing about it. They know who the tenants are that are doing it.
Okay. Are there any other questions or points of discussion? Counselor Jordan, we're on agenda items 14 and 15, awaiting the planning board.
Section 2, that would make.
Well, Attorney Cunha,
Is there a middle ground here? Is it kind of-
Attorney Cunha pointed out that we can deal with landlords that have trash in their property with other sections of the code, which we have done all along. And yes, the enforcement, unfortunately, sometimes we have to enforce landlords who do not clean their property, whether it be their tenants or their own trash. And sometimes we have to enforce the landlords to clean their property when they've been a victim of illegal dumping. The title of this ordinance is an act to be authorized and establish a program for enforcement against illegal dumping. Section 2 doesn't address illegal dumping. It addresses a piece of property that should be cleaned up. And we can enforce that in other ways through the code. I believe the Board of Health can enforce it through the state code. But to put these penalties on someone who's been a victim is what we talked about at the last meeting. Is just not right. It's not right to the person who keeps a clean property and someone drives down the alleyway and dumps 4 tires.
Okay, so may I direct a question to Kara?
Sure.
Okay, so what I'm saying here is we're not trying to victimize, we're not going after these kind of fines for the victim. Somebody dumps 4 tires on their property, right? We're not going to go after them for this kind of a fine and stuff. They've got X amount of time. Right now, you can take them down to Rucky's for $5 each and dispose of them. Somebody dumped them on their property, they didn't get caught.
But the city has gone after them, and that's the point I'm making. There's a history of this, of enforcement comes not for the person who does the illegal dumping, but for the person who's been dumped on.
Right. So just for clarification, while we're under suspension of rules, Attorney Cunha, we have under our other ordinances the ability to address the issue that Counselor McGivern is speaking of?
I mean, I think so, and that's what the Board of Health has been doing, but I think Counselor Sullivan filed this order because it doesn't really provide for very high fines, but maybe that's
Right.
not what you want to do for the property owners.
Right.
I mean, I think, like I said, it just gives some flexibility. If you do have a property owner who's a repeat offender, it gives some extra teeth. But like I said, it's all in the discretion of the enforcing officer. And the penalty is a maximum of $5,000. Well, if it even was a civil penalty, up to 3 times the amount the city has to pay to clean it, up to $5,000. I mean, realistically, we would probably only really try and recover our costs, maybe after somebody continually doesn't comply with orders. So,
Thank you.
Okay,
Well,
I think
I will, if I may, I'm going to speak for myself on this in that the goal of this ordinance is to establish a program to enforce against illegal dumping. And I'm going to support Counselor McGivern on this. There's no intention, and nor should there be any goal of an ordinance or an unintended consequence where single citizens are picked out based on an ordinance. And that's not what we're trying to do here. And so I'm hearing there's a concern that that could happen. So I'm hoping that the committee, someone's going to make a motion to approve this as amended. Let's try it with Section 2 out and see if we can get at the big issues. And we have other ordinances that can address the public health issues on individual properties. I'm hearing definitely the distinction between an enforcement against illegal dumping and somebody's yard that somebody doesn't think is to whatever standards they might like. And I think they're two different things. So, but that's my perspective on it. Counselor Sullivan?
Okay, so, Kara, if we were to strike Section 2 altogether, right? We've got a property owner who now gets caught red-handed, seen hauling the stuff out of an apartment building. Let's say they're, as a gross example, cleaning their cleaning the basement, the boiler area. They've got bags of asbestos, and we see them do that. They fall back under the rest. They've been caught red-handed doing this, and they're still subject to the rest of the ordinance. They're not going to skate out under it as a property owner.
right, no, as long as they were dumping it on land that's owned by somebody else. If you were, for some reason, dumping it on your own property, then technically you wouldn't be in violation because it has to be on the property of somebody else or city property or a public way.
You see the problem I have with striking it?
Well, the alleys are somebody's property.
Alleys would be. I think that's I think there's still a debatable issue on that, who owns the alleys, right?
The DPW can cite that landlord, because that's against the city ordinance for the way we put trash out. And that landlord is supposed to put stuff out in the dumpster if it's an apartment building of 5 apartments or more. If it's less, they put it out for the city to pick it up. They cannot put asbestos in their trash. They cannot put it out in a manner where any bulk items can be put out to the curbside on any property, their own or anyone else's, or the city's, which is actually, property is actually what the curbside is. So there are ways to cite that person.
Counselor Jordan?
Kara, as I understand it, in the spirit of kind of trying to move us forward, because I think both Counselor Sullivan and McGivern are making great points, is that under the current law, we can, in the scenario that Counselor Sullivan articulated, I believe there's already existing a current rule against that. There also is a potential for a $300 fine, correct? This special act seeks to enhance the penalties to the quite hefty sums that we're looking to really, put it on people. So isn't it fair to say that although if we were to strike out Section 2, it doesn't mean that conduct now becomes legal. It would just default to the current city rules. That is, if an owner dumped, say, in an alleyway, they would be punishable under the current ordinances, correct? Even if it were, like, for example, we have rules under state sanitary code and otherwise, you can't even dump on your own property, for example, if it creates either a violation of the sanitary code and what have you, right?
Right, I mean, we treat it as under the litter ordinances, and there's an ordinance that requires you to maintain private property free of litter. So in the example of an alleyway, we usually treat it like each person owns halfway and is
Right.
responsible for their half. So if they were dumping it on their own half, I mean, maybe under the special act, you might be able to make an argument it's a public way and they could be cited for the higher fines, even though they're the property owner. But right now, the maximum would be 300, or if it's a non-criminal ticket, it's 100.
So I guess my point is, if we strike section 2 to build a compromise here to get us moving forward, it isn't that, there still is penalties for that conduct.
Right,
It's just that it would be not the enhanced penalties, it would be the reduced penalty.
correct.
Okay. Counselor Sullivan, would it be possible to go in that direction in the interim, that we pass all the rest of this, and that we, in those scenarios where we have the owner theoretically dumping on their own property, that we could use current law to do that? Is
In the spirit of compromise and moving along, we've got something new going on here with a lot of teeth in it that'll address 90% of the problem. Let's go.
Yeah, and I also want to just say, to compliment you, I mean, you've really done an outstanding job on this, and this is tremendous legislation, and you're to be credited with bringing this issue forward.
If we get it through Boston.
Let's hope.
Counselor Lisi?
Thank you. Kara, I'm just wondering, when you and Board of Health, Building Commissioner are dealing with problem properties, do you feel that the legislation that we have, the ordinances that we have on the books, give you the tools that you need, or does Section 2 seem to be something that you would like to have in terms of assisting you all in the enforcement?
I mean, I definitely understand the points. I do think it's always just another option in the case where for some reason you have some kind of perpetual problem that the property owner's not responding to. And so it's always good to have more options than not. And that's really what it would be.
And I think the way that you're framing it here is that it's an option, so it doesn't mean that there's a mandatory penalty, but for those cases where we do have repeat offenders, problem property owners that are using their property as a dump site.
Yeah. I mean, I think particularly if I'm just thinking of one scenario where I know Ernie dealt repeatedly with a business that was repeatedly having customers or users of the building dump trash in the alleyway. And I think that's a perfect example of repeated violations that they haven't done it, that if the city has to go and clean that up, we should be able to recover. This would allow us to recover, anytime we clean it up, we could recover our costs, but this would add an additional amount. And all the fines that are collected are set to go into I forget what it's called, disposal, and a separate fund that's then used to fund either city expenses in cleaning up or additional personnel or other programs related to this. We talked about the reward program, so any of those, anything that's recovered would go back towards the same purpose.
But is it also true that most of the multi-apartment complexes are owned by somebody who's not in town and they're managed by somebody else? So it's not going to be the owner dumping on their own property in those examples, correct?
But the owner will be cited.
Right, but they wouldn't be under Section 2 so that we then couldn't deal with them because the owners aren't dumping
No,
it
the
on their
under-
own property on the apartment complexes. They don't live there.
Well, but
It's
they
their
could be,
agent, though. It's their agent.
right, as the property owner, in your case, in that case, it would be the building owner that would be cited under Section 2. And it's the same now. If a landlord's repeatedly not emptying a dumpster, it's the landlord's that's cited as the property owner. You have to maintain your property.
Right, but they could be cited under the other sections because they're not dumping on their own property. They're still going to be in violation of this ordinance if they're dumping in the alley, correct?
It would depend. The alleyway is either half their
Well,
property
or
half.
on some other place.
Yeah, I don't know.
I guess the scenario that I think of hearing Counselor Bacon's point is that if the property manager is doing the dumping, they're not the owner. So that section 2 would not apply to those problem property owners that have,
Well, it would. The owner would be, because the owner would be cited to clean it up. And if the owner doesn't take the action to clean it up, the owner would be fined.
But they
And I
could be
would think
cited
as a
under
property owner,
Section
you would
3.
want to make sure your agent, I mean, if it was true that the property manager was the one personally dumping it, they could be cited under section 1, but the
Mm-hmm. Right.
owner could be cited under section 2. And that's the same, the owner could always now be cited under our current ordinances because they, and that's what you're referring to, they have a duty to keep their property clean regardless of who unfortunately might dump something on it.
thank you, Kara.
Thank you. So what is the pleasure of the committee? Do we want, in the interest of compromise, to move it forward with an amendment, or
Yeah.
I'm open to a motion?
I'm going to make a motion to strike section 2 under the spirit of we have current laws that cover this, that 95% of everything else is in agreement with pretty much everyone, and if worse comes to worse, this becomes an issue, we can always revisit section 2 and pass it at a future date.
All in favor? Aye.
I'm going to vote no for the record against the amendment.
Okay, so 3-1, it passes and will be recommended favorably as amended to the city council. Thank
Well,
you.
you actually just took a vote on the amendment because I mean, I'm going
Oh,
on the
you're voting
record.
against the amendment. Okay, I'm sorry. So it is now amended.
Yep.
And I need a motion on the amended
Make a
form.
motion that it be adopted as amended.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, we went out of order to give you folks a chance to get here, and I see that the planning board is with us, so we'll go back to regular order.
Oh, she's out there. Eileen?
We just went out of order because we saw you had other business and thought you were tied up, so, not to keep you waiting, yeah. Is everybody set? Okay. So we'll return to normal order, and we're leaving item 1 on the table because we haven't reviewed the minutes. So item 2, I'll accept a motion to reopen the public hearing.
So moved?
All in favor?
Aye.
And item 2 is the order that solar installations by right be limited to industrial and business zones. Any other solar proposals in a residential zone other than an individual home be subject to special permit.
Make a motion to open our public hearing. All in favor? Aye.
Okay, so this is the, I think, 4th time that we are hearing this. Due to some technical issues, 2 of the hearings were held separately. So this is the first time that we're coming together on the joint hearing relative to the solar matters. And so I'm first interested if we have members of the public that would wish to speak either in favor or against the modification of the ordinance. If you wish to speak, if you would go to the microphone, make sure that it's on, give us your name and address and any information that you wish us to consider in looking at amending the ordinance, please.
Is this on? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, my name is Beth Strikars. I live on 25 Woodland Street. Now, I have some concerns, and I also have some questions that I'd like the city council to think about, and the mayor as well. First of all, I'd like to know, and you probably won't answer these questions tonight, but has an environmental impact study been done on this project for the Martin Street Solar Project? I don't know. I would just like to know that. Perhaps somebody could get back to me on that. So if not, I would like to know why. If so, I would like to know where this can be viewed. Secondly, this is a concern. I live on Woodland Street. This is a street that's notorious for drainage problems, and it has been for decades. You can verify that with the engineering department and the Mass DOT. They've been both on our street several times. And I've talked to several neighbors. We're afraid of the drainage issues on the street. We live at the bottom of that hill where the complex will be above the top. They're going to take down trees, and we're extremely concerned about erosion. So that's a concern I have. Also, I'm concerned about, here's a question. On the Martin Street residence, it's zoned R2 for single-family and multifamily residences. How can they put a solar farm, which is typically commercial, in a residential 2 area? And I know Massachusetts, they're solar farm friendly, and I guess by right they can. But I know in several cities, and an article appeared in the Boston Globe, that you can actually put solar farms in designated areas by bylaw or by outlay districts. And I think the city of Chicopee is doing that right now. So I would like the city council to consider that as well. Perhaps they could consider areas like down by the canals. We've had several buildings, commercial buildings, that are dilapidated, falling down. Perhaps some of these solar companies, if they were really concerned about the city of Holyoke, they could invest some money in demolishing these buildings and taking them down and then putting in the solar farms. That's an idea I had. Also, I'd like to know what benefit this will be to the city. Is it going to just benefit a few people, the landowner, the solar company, and the Holyoke G&E? I mean, are we going to get a rate reduction on this? When I talked to Mr. Zwerko, he said probably not. So he said your rates won't increase, but they won't decrease as well. So, you know, what's the benefit? Somebody's going to profit on this, and I don't think it's going to be the taxpayers of Holyoke. Also, I'd like to know who negotiated the contract. In other words, was it the mayor with the landowners and the solar company? How are the $5,000, I think that increment was mentioned, that would be paid to the city? How is that actually determined? Did they go out to other searches in other cities and towns and states and find out, well, gee, $5,000 seems an illegitimate pay cost to the city? How is that actually determined? I know I'm an appraiser, and when I do a property, I do rents by market. I go out to the market and I search the market and I find what the rents are being paid in the area. So how was this dollar amount figured out? Also, I just have a couple more. Sorry, I'm just rambling on here. I'm also concerned about how are they going to keep vegetation off of the panels? Is it going to be by chemicals, toxic chemicals? What's the impact to the land? What's the impact to the environment? You're going to be taking down probably hundreds of trees in that area. The name on my street is Woodland Street. So what's going to happen to that? Also, who's going to maintain the panels? Is it going to be an out-of-state company? Is it going to be Holyoke? Is there concern going to be about the surrounding area? Are they going to mow? Are they going to put the chemicals? And I already went through that question. Also, the contract. I heard it's a 20-year contract. I'm really questioning that as well, because is there going to be some kind of escalator clause in there? I mean, we don't really know what the cost is. Say this solar farm is abandoned. Is the city now going to have to pick up the cost of demolishing it and taking it down? So I know Mr. Zwerko mentioned a $200,000 surety bond, but how do we know that's going to cover that in, say, 20 years down the road when the solar farm is decommissioned? So I'd also like, you to think about that as well. Oh, and one more thing. Is that going to become a brownfield after the solar farm leaves? Are we going to have to contend with that? Does anybody know what's going to happen? Will it be a brownfield? Consider it a brownfield. I'd like that also. So in closing, I think I've just about covered everything. I'm just concerned about the city, and I hope our city doesn't become a warehouse for solar farms. Thanks so much.
You.
Thank you for having me.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? You can just approach the mic.
I would just like to speak. My name's Attorney Thomas Wilson, and I'll be representing SHR Energy. And first of all, I give credit, Mrs. Strycars, for your questions, and you have every right. But I think that this part, as my understanding, is on the ordinance, not the projects.
Correct.
So I would just either ask to defer any more questions and conversations on the actual projects till we get to that phase, and not the ordinance. This is not, the public hearing, as I understand it, is on the pilot agreement only. This is not a public hearing on the projects themselves. This is, unless I'm mistaken. Zoning.
Yeah, we're on a
zoning,
public,
right.
yeah, we're on a public hearing
On the
now.
zoning, but not on this question right now.
Right.
Correct.
Right now, it's on the ordinance, sorry.
To
Correct.
determine if residential, we should have a special permit of the city council in
Right.
residential zones
Correct.
that these would be located
But
in.
the part with the individual projects, which is I think where Ms. Strycars' questions, a lot of those will be answered, I want to say, during the next whatever part.
Sure.
Number 3 or 4, whatever on the agenda that these are.
Correct.
So-
I did read the order into the record that is related to the purpose of the public hearing, which is talking about solar installations by right be limited to industrial and business zones. Any other solar proposals in a residential zone other than an individual home be subject to special permit. There may be some confusion because this is on the agenda and the other items are also
I just
on
want
the
to make sure
agenda.
that that's where we're at now.
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
you are correct. Thank you.
I'm Charlie Bleemer from 114 Rock Valley Road, and I'm speaking in favor of the ordinance for special permitting and special regulations on the zoning for solar. I realize that a lot of these programs they're done, they're going to happen. My concern is for the future, for other people, what they're going to have to see and have to contend with if it comes up in their neighborhood. Couple of things I wanted to touch on. At the last meeting, I heard some concerns about maybe these regulations might make us seem unfriendly to business. I would say that when we have special regulations, we will get a better quality of contractors. Anybody who's had a new bathroom or a new kitchen or whatever done knows that there's contractors, and there are contractors. When we have anything done for the city, for the public, there's a long list of requirements that have to be met, and they're really well thought out before the project is awarded. And that's what we want to have there. We don't want just some fly-by-night company coming in and going out. We've talked about a couple of the projects that are up. The one on County Road, how it wasn't maintained, and the trees are dying, and we hear that this other contractor that's going to be doing another one, they're different, and they're going to do this and they're going to do that, and they're going to do a better job. Quite at length, one of the employees of the Oil, Gas, and Electric, Mr. Biergard, spoke about it, And he talked about, especially about their project down in Springdale. And he talked about how the residents down in Springdale, they were against the project and they didn't want it put up. And he assured them that, you know, it was going to be this beautiful thing and they were going to put this fence up and everything else. Well, I understand that this ordinance is going to especially address setbacks, vegetation, covering, and maintenance. If anybody wants to know the importance of setbacks and maintenance, you just take a ride down to Meadow Street or down to Grand Street and take a look, because we were there tonight, and it is a mess. And if I was a member, or a resident rather, of Meadow Street, and I heard what I heard at the last meeting, they'd have heard a lot from me, I'm telling you. Anybody wants to take a ride down there and ask themselves, would you like to come out in your front door and take a look across the street and see that? Would you like to try to sell your home and have a realtor come and take a look at that? So I'd invite anybody to take a ride down there, take a look at what we saw tonight. And if anybody is, you know, I just can't believe what I heard at the last meeting about how proud he was of that project down there. It is a mess. So I'm really in favor of this ordinance change. I think we need special permits. We need to know who's going to take care of these. And if the Holyoke Gas and Electric is not maintaining a project here in Holyoke, how are we going to trust somebody? Maybe that's the wrong word. How are we going to believe that somebody from Boston or Connecticut or New Jersey or something is going to come back and maintain that? So we need to know where the maintaining is coming from, who's going to be responsible, and the enforcement and the teeth. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? Not seeing any? Oh. Yes?
The agreement, he mentioned the agreement, yes. I was wondering how you can ratify an agreement when you don't really know what the site or the actual project isn't up. Is it because they have to decide how much money they're going to be making to pay the city? I'm not quite understanding that. So that's another question I have, okay? Thank you, sorry.
Thanks.
There's no other members of
Are
the public.
are any other members of the public wishing to be heard at this time? If not, then we will move to members of the committee or the planning board for any comments or questions you may have. Councilor Jourdain?
Thank you. I just want to support the change. I think this is a long time coming. I think this is something we frankly would have done years ago had we known better. You know, sometimes legislating is a learning process. And when we passed the Green Communities Act, we were told all this has to be allowed by right. And you cannot have special permits. You can't do any of these type of restrictions. In fact, you have to allow all these things, residential, commercial, industrial zones. And as anything else, when new laws pass and new things happen, these things circulate their ways through the courts. And what has happened? Courts have said, you can pretty much flat out ban these things in residential zones. You do not have to allow them in residential zones. And so we now have come to understand our powers. And as a result, this legislation ensues here for Holyoke. This is absolutely common sense. When you think of the potential impact of, most of these are 4-acre projects. I mean, if somebody were to locate a drive-through in Holyoke, you have to have a special permit to do that. Things that are of much less de minimis in nature compared to solar fields require special permits, all justifiably. Where you have a solar field, 4 acres in scope, parked across somebody's house, clear-cutting forest which has a certain irony to it, does it not? That this is supposed to be green. It's like, how many trees do I need to cut down to help the environment, huh? I mean, I'm supposedly helping the environment as I'm slashing down trees. But we'll just leave that aside for a moment. The fact of the matter is, one would have to believe that solar fields are considered so much more aesthetically pleasing than trees to be next to your home. That you would rather look at a 4-acre sparse of panels versus looking at beautiful wildlife and animals and trees. I mean, it just defies absolute logic. Here's the other piece. As it goes right now, neighbors, you don't even get the benefit of notice. These things just come in, boom, have a nice day. All of a sudden you walk out one day and you see demo trucks clear-cutting trees across from your home. This is ridiculous. And so therefore, it is so obvious that government needs to respond here, that this is what we do to create reasonable legislation. In the commercial and industrial areas, we're going to continue to allow it by right, whereas people's homes are not in direct conflict. We are also putting in the caveat that if people want to have roof-based residential, you can continue to have that by right. But where you have ground-based solar facilities in residential zones, this is absolutely common sense. And I think we would have done this years ago had we known we could do it. So now that we do, it's so obvious we need to close this loophole. And so I couldn't be more enthusiastic in support of this, and I certainly encourage the entire city council to vote in favor of this.
Counselor McGivern?
I'd just like to concur with Councilor Jordan and add a couple comments. When the city was created as one of the leading industrial cities within the region, no one had any idea that zoning would one day come into play, or probably should have came into play a lot earlier than it did. And we've established neighborhoods that are industrial, commercial, and residential neighborhoods right in the thick of it. And this happens throughout the city. When the city and other, not just Holyoke, but when municipalities understood that cities needed to be zoned to be able to protect residential neighborhoods with their coexistence with industrial and commercial property, the zoning laws were created. It still causes challenges on a daily basis for city government. And I think a special permit for any type of solar project within a residential zone is well overdue. And like Kevin said, I wish we knew it when we were told that we could not prevent or we could not stop solar projects in any type of zoning. Now we know we can, and now we can establish it. We're not eliminating it completely, but we're making it difficult to put solar projects in residential zones. We were land poor, both industrial and commercial. We're also land poor in residential areas. We need more homes, and we need to protect the residential zones that we have.
Thank you. Counselor Shatnoff?
Thank you. I'm also in favor of this ordinance. And a lot of people hear special permit in this room and they think it's a no from the city council. It's not. It's just another step somebody has to take. And I think a special permit process gives the residents more voice than obviously they haven't had. So I'm in full favor of this. Thank you.
Counselor Lisi?
Thank you. I just wanted to note a couple things about the ordinance. Number one, there's a section 1G that does list notification. So property owners and the parcels of land within 300 feet of the project site should be provided notice. And then additionally, all that we are creating with a special permit process is an up or down situation. City council can say yes or no. We can even put conditions on the special permit, but they can only be within the parameters of the ordinance. And so I don't think that the special permit process creates any new standards that are going to protect the residents on the issues that they're most concerned about. The residents have come forward a number of times talking about the need for more robust screening, for deeper setbacks and maintenance, and we're not addressing any of those issues related to the ordinance. So we could create an up or down process through special permitting and say yes or no and put conditions and requirements, but they have to fall within the parameters of this ordinance. And this ordinance, we're hearing from the residents, doesn't go far enough to protect the things that they're concerned about. And so I don't think that the special permit route is actually addressing the real concerns of the residents and neighbors. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
So as the maker of the order, I'd like to weigh in here, and I appreciate the support that has been voiced tonight so far, and I appreciate even more the feedback from the neighbors who are being directly impacted. And the folks who earlier made the statement that we created the ordinance we did because we understood, after having asked at the time of the creation, that we had to create it in the way that you see it before you. And I'm here to say that if we're unable to make the necessary modifications to this ordinance to protect the concerns that you have raised, as soon as we do make the changes that will go as far as we can to do that, I will file the rest of the order that's needed to actually make the rest of it happen. If the committee feels that we do not have enough jurisdiction to make other amendments that go to the issues that have been raised at the public hearing. So I want you to know that I'm living out there with you with one of the projects, and I was very involved in the review of a most recent project. And I think that there is language in the ordinance that if we chose to use it, such as the term of general welfare, which is a very broad statement, and which leaves discretion to bodies in terms of making decisions for the benefit of the community, which is what our zoning is supposed to be for. So be assured that if we can't fix it all the way with this, we will fix it the rest of the way once we accomplish the first step. Thank you very much.
Madam Chair? Yeah,
Councilor Jordan.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to point out, there is a section 7.9.52, which speaks to special permit criteria. In it is the broad language regarding adverse impact to the neighborhood. It speaks to taking in characteristics of the site. Basically, all of the standard language that we use for special permittings gets into the social, economic, community needs are being served, traffic flow, safety, parking, loading, adequacy of utilities, neighborhood character and social structure, impacts on the natural environment, potential fiscal impact, and so forth. So my point is, these broad things can be addressed by condition requirements in the event that we were to decide to advance this. The rest of 7.95 and the accompanying site plan language also speaks to all of the other things that traditionally people are interested in the event that we would want to grant one of these, i.e. screening, things of this nature. So I think, while we can always do better if there's suggested other language that we could put in here, this lies at the crux of, is this going to be allowed by right, or is this going to be allowed by special permit? Point being is, people will be notified. If they feel it shouldn't go in, the city council can vote accordingly. No solar plant, period. That's the crux of this ordinance. And we can belabor the point more than that, but I think that's really at the core of it, as opposed to current law, which just allows these by right. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Marrero?
Thank you. I wanted to follow up on a point of discussion we had at the last version of this public hearing, a little bit on the logistics, and particularly in section 7.9.3 definitions. So Kara provided a draft of what the amended order would look like, granting the city council special permit provisions on large-scale ground-mounted solar facilities. That's very clear. However, I just want to point out one thing and suggest a second. One is that the definition of large scale, where the special permit would kick in, would be at the size of 250 kilowatts. Now it's not a huge field, but it's still a pretty sizable solar facility. At the prior public hearing, I provided the suggestion that with a mere tweak to this number, we could get to a number where, say a homeowner has a good acreage, 1-2 acres. But for whatever reason, it's pretty expensive to have a solar system on your roof. Your average rooftop solar system for residential will be 3 to 5 kilowatts. If you have a big home, that could be, maybe 7 kilowatts up to 10 kilowatts, something like that. So my point being that, there may be a situation where you can have a very small system right next to your house, outside of everyone's view, something like a 10 kilowatt system. We're talking about the footprint of that is about 5 parking spaces. That's something that could readily be hidden from every neighbor. But you wouldn't put a homeowner through the process of having to go through a special permit. So there could be a really easy carve out if we just specified in that number instead of 250, if we said something like 10 kilowatts. And so anyone who's doing anything either on their roof or right next to their house on the ground, you would have to have a lot of land to do that anyway, because you don't want any intervention from the solar rays, right? So.
Thank you. To your point, at the last public hearing that we had, or it perhaps was under discussion of the pilot agreements, Mr. Beauregard shared with us, because I asked him what the average home would need to generate if they wanted to have a home-based solar. And he stated 2 kilowatts. I asked him how many panels that was. He said about 30 panels. And so that is sort of the scenario and the understanding that we are taking when we're looking at roof-mounted versus small scale. We do have a definition in here for small scale, which is less than 250 kilowatts. And so what some of the suggestions have been is that the roof-mounted would make sense in the residential zone, but similar to the fact that we have ordinances that say you cannot pave your front yard and make it into asphalt, I think similarly, we would not want people to take their entire yard and turn it into solar panels when their neighbors purchased however much acreage that they did to live in a RA zone. That's the only zone there's a lot of acreage in, to my knowledge. And so you've heard mostly from people who live in the RA zone. And this is exactly what they're concerned about. So I take your point. But that's our whole idea, to take in all the points. And then we look forward to the recommendation from the planning board. Did you want to speak again? No. Is there anybody else who wishes? Eileen Regan?
Yeah, I'm interested to know what Councilor Lisi, if she would expand on what she said earlier and ideas that she might have.
So if you go to design standards, so section 2, it says screening, and then abutting residential uses, but there's no there's no real setback requirements. It says it talks about the vegetation buffer, but there's no setback requirements. If the 50-foot vegetation buffer isn't providing adequate screening, I think that we should talk about if it makes sense to have that densified, or if you want to require specific types of plantings that offer the right type of screening, and put it into the ordinance as opposed to. Again, I just don't think that the special permit is going to be able to achieve some of the, what do I want to say? Sorry, it's not going to resolve the issues that are being raised here. If screening, maintenance, and setbacks are the things that are, the things that are bothering the neighbors, I just don't see us addressing those. We're creating a special permit to say, yes, you can do this, or no, you can't. But if we say yes and they move forward on the project, we still don't have the ability to create wider buffers, thicker vegetation, things that would actually address the concerns of the residents, and based on what we've heard so far.
So you don't think that could be done by incorporated in the special permit?
Well, from what I understand with a special permit, you can put conditions on the permit, but they have to be within the parameters of the ordinance. You can't ask them to go above and beyond what the ordinance sets out. I mean, to me, the ordinance is supposed to be the law, the guideline, and that's going to be applied evenly across the board. So you could say, you know, this site makes sense, this site doesn't make sense, but where we do say the site makes sense and we allow for the special permit doesn't do it doesn't go above and beyond what's already in the ordinance. Conditions can be set, but they can't expand or modify the ordinance. They can.
So you feel that the ordinance might need to be modified?
I think that the ordinance would be a more even-handed way to address the issues that the residents are raising, and that if we strengthened the language related to setbacks, if we strengthen the language related to screening and maintenance, perhaps we would get better results that worked for the neighborhood.
So I would just like to say that I'm very much in favor of these changes. I think that the special permit puts, an immediate sort of stopgap that we need right now. But I do agree with Councilor Lisi that we may need to look at revising the ordinance. And one of the things that I feel needs to be added, we have a surety bond for abandonment, but I think that we need to have a surety bond for, screening that doesn't live, or I don't know how we want to word it, but, like we have out on County Road. They did all the plantings, but they all died. So we need to have some sort of assurance that, the screening that either we can replace it, or, that they have to replace it, or whatever. But that has consistently come up as an issue. So I think if we are going to look at modifying the ordinance, which I agree with Councilor Lisi that we may, you may need to think about that should be looked at.
Thank you. Councilor Jourdain?
Yes, I want to second everything that Commissioner Regan just said. And just to add to that, back to the point I think we were mentioning, and it incorporates Marcos's point, I think it would be, and I would like the planning board to consider in its recommendation, instead of getting into this whole notion of so many kilowatts and then ground is allowed or not, I think if we just said any ground one would be by special permit, and that we have it as all the rooftops would just be the other end of the pendulum. We would say any of the rooftop would just be allowed by right, period. And then that would make it real clear cut. If you put it up on your roof, whether it's your garage, whether it's your house, whatever, those will be allowed by right. In that, how much roof space could they possibly have? That's going to be somewhat limiting of a restraint there. They won't be able to go totally unreasonable. And then if you go to the ground-based, they'd have to get a special permit. And I don't think neighbors really object to, from anything I've heard, of roof-based ones. So I would ask the planning board to consider that as it's evaluating a recommendation.
Mr. Marrero?
Just to right set expectations, I think the limitation on the roof is going to be that if, particularly with older houses, if it doesn't have the load-bearing capacity, the ability to install anything will be zero. So at that point, just to right set expectations, everyone will either have to redo their roof or come in for a special permit on the ground. That's a clarification.
We could,
Is there any other person that wishes to be heard? If there is no one else who wishes to speak, I believe we've taken in adequate information. If the planning board agrees that, from our perspective, we could probably entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll make the motion to close the public hearing.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Do I hear a motion?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you all very much. It was a lot of good input. I think we end up with a better result for it. So item 3 was filed by Councilor Jourdain. I'll accept a motion to reopen the public hearing.
Second. So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. This order was filed by Councilor Jourdain that the zoning section 7.1.1.4 be amended as follows by adding the following clause. Parking lots or structures designed to serve these institutions and their accessory uses and buildings are allowed whether or not a fee is charged for their use, provided that parking lots shall only be used by special permit of the city council.
You guys need to
Motion.
open yours, right?
Your hearing is closed on this matter already?
Oh, yes, that's right, because we have that.
If I understand correctly? Okay.
Yeah, because we actually
So-
have a recommendation from them
So
already.
at the time, this was our awkward scheduling matter. So we have the recommendation before us tonight. It's my understanding there's no new information that we were seeking. We just did this as a coordination effort. So I would, I need to check. First, if there is anyone from the public that is here to speak for or against this item? Hearing none, and is there any member of the council or the committee?
I just wanted to ask, real quick, I think it was maybe Jeff or Marcos, in the recommendation, you wanted, we did it, so it's any of these, the parking, it's by special permit of the city council, all that language made its way into the proposed ordinance for our adoption. So all of the planning, that was the planning board's recommendation. We got all of the spirit of everything the planning board wanted into here.
Yeah, essentially, we took out that one sentence which was controversial, which allowed the parking to go anywhere in the city as long as it was
Exactly, yeah.
accessory. And then as long as there was parking being added or built, they would have to refer to the previously worked on ordinance relating to parking by special permit in the downtown. So everything's contained there as far as stormwater and vegetation and all that stuff.
Okay. All right, great.
Right,
And it was, and we got the special permit that's in there in the table.
It's a special permit by planning board, right? It's the same language that was there before. So it makes someone have to go through
I think
the
my
same
ordinance-
special permit process that was established by council.
So this is public hearing, so we have the recommendation. All we're doing right now is closing our public hearing
Fine.
unless the committee wishes to act otherwise.
That's fine.
So if somebody wants to give a motion to close our hearing.
Motion to close the public hearing.
We still have to allow the public to speak, I think.
I offered.
Did anybody want to speak?
Nobody rose to speak. I'm sorry.
I thought so too, but. Recommendation, I
I
think
thought we
Kira's-
had continued them both to tonight, but I may be mistaken in that regard,
Should we take another vote to close it just in case? or-
just to be safe.
Huh?
Right, so I think we need to close it.
Okay, make a motion to be closed.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you. Okay, so I would entertain a motion to open the public hearing for a new zone
We have
change.
the recommendation before, so we should motion to adopt the recommendation.
Well, I'm not sure if we're there.
Well, I like all of the regulations and everything, but I think I was pretty clear that I wanted it to be a special permit by the city council. So as it relates to that one component, the rest of it I don't have a particular problem with. I like all the other rules on it. It's just that,
If I may, just as a matter of a point of information.
Yep.
In the interest of time for the planning board.
Oh,
I thought
okay.
if we could get through the public hearing.
okay,
And it doesn't prohibit us
yeah, I don't want to hold
from
that.
taking a later action on the item.
Okay, I don't want to hold them up. Yeah,
Then, motion to table.
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so this item is tabled. So I would entertain a motion to open the public hearing on item 4.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. This item is an application for a zone change of the frontier development at 1575 Northampton Street. Map references, known to us as the former Lynch School, from current zone R1A to BH. I'm sorry? Oh, sure.
Sorry.
Can we open our public hearing?
Go ahead.
Yeah, motion to open the public hearing for the zone change petition from R1A to BH. We have 1916 Northampton Street.
No.
No, it's 15 something. I grew up at
1575?
Yeah, I grew up at 1687, so I know it's not 19
So,
something.
so we need to change this to 15 what?
75.
75 Northampton Street. The petitioner is Frontier Development.
Correct.
Second on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So you,
Thank you. Thank you, Counselor.
point of information from Council Shatna.
As many know, I own a restaurant here in town, which is right next to Lynch School, so I contacted the legal department today to see if I had a conflict of interest, and it seems I do. On 2 counts, one being that there's a potential of a fast food restaurant opening at that location, and second, I do not abut the property, but I am in the 300-foot zone, so I need to abstain from voting and discussing. Thank you.
Thank you. Attorney Wilson.
Attorney Thomas Wilson.
Attorney
18
Thomas Wilson.
18 Carter Street, and I don't know if this is for the record, but since everyone's at closing, I also own property at 1685, 1687 Northampton Street. And I am representing Frontier Development in this project. I have a few remarks before I'm going to turn it over to the real professionals who are going to explain everything, show you everything, and hopefully bedazzle you. This is a project that we are developing at the Lynch School site. As of right now, that's the only site we're discussing, the Lynch School site, as of this time. The area around that area school has always been business highway. From the time Howard Johnson's to Tony Gorel's Garage to the Cray's Package Store, where I not only work, but it's been around. So this is not anything like a spot zoning or anything. In fact, the Lynch School zoning is sort of, if you really want to stretch it, a spot zoning, because everything else around it is business highway. And just, we might as well get started, is, as you know, or as you've probably been told, that the project will be a fast food on a pad and also a CVS. Now, for 2 things, is one is that, and I think your legal counsel will tell you that it's the use, not the project, that we're here to discuss. So the fact of what it is should not play into how you vote. It's the use of it. It's turning it into a business highway, which right now is one thing. It could be another. It could be another thing, but that's the zone change right now. To let you know some facts, based on some calculations, this will bring at least $130,000 worth of new taxes a year into this property. It will create around 40 some odd new jobs. It will not affect, it'll affect traffic on that part, but it will not affect traffic on the Dunkin' Donuts, Jim's Mobile, and my barber's side of Northampton Street. We have traffic reports, which I'll, when the appropriate time, I'll hand out to you. And we will be doing a full traffic study, not because you've asked us, but because it's a state highway and the state requires that we do so. These people are here. The city council voted on selling the school. An RFP was put out. A purchase and sale has been signed, and it's been extended. I don't know I can explain the history of it. So I just want to get all these things out in the open before we actually start this process. These gentlemen who are here, Eric Gordon from Frontier Development, Mike Hodiak is a realtor, and the real star of my show is John Furman from BBH, who has done all the planning and the designing. And before I finish my opening, I'd like to know where he should put these plans and things on the easels so everyone can see them. So.
Probably,
Yeah, maybe over there.
maybe next to Rebecca. Yep. Facing that,
And,
if it's
so,
there,
okay.
facing that way,
John, if you want to do that while I'm here.
we'll have to
But-
crane our necks, but we can.
Again, and I say this for 3 reasons, is one is obviously I'm representing these people, but number 2 and 3 is I am a citizen of Holyoke. I'm a business person in Holyoke. So my plea is that you allow this zone change so that we can get some tax money into our city. We are, at the last choice, we are the poorest poor city in the Commonwealth. Every day we hear we need business, we need business, we need business. Here we are. We have a national company who is here to do this. They've looked at other sites in Holyoke that they may develop other things that have nothing to do with this. We don't know that yet, but I am introducing them to you because I think that this is it's not what everybody wants. I understand that, but that shouldn't be part of the issue. If you ask why certain things are there and certain things aren't there, we'll probably answer it, but the issue is the use. The use being retail and restaurant, not whose restaurant, not what. And before that, if the rumors and innuendos fly, we don't know what restaurant yet. That's not been decided by any means or any particular decision at this point. We're trying to get the project up and running, and we hope that you will listen, pay attention, and allow us to avoid the zone change so that we can get new taxes and get some things into the city to help everybody out. And I've explained one thing, the Frontier Development, that they need to be a good Holyoke citizen. So sponsorships and things coming up, we've got people who are willing to, Little League and things like that, they know about being a corporate citizen. Because I know how people feel about a national company, it's a national company, they're going to be, but these people are not. They work in towns all over. So first I'm going to introduce you to John Berman, who is going to take you through the design and the things like that. Go ahead. You want to go? Okay. I don't know how you're going to do it without being the...
Got a pointer.
Oh, beautiful.
Good evening. My name is John Furman. I'm the managing director of VHB. We're in the engineering office in Springfield. I have a couple plans to go through, so what I'll do is I'll just walk you through what we've done to date, analysis that we've done, talk about some traffic numbers. I have a couple renderings that are behind that, but for the most part, this is the one that we'll use.
There is a microphone there.
That'd be great, because I had cheat notes on that, and my
Sure.
vision isn't.
And this is not a vision test. Yeah, so you can. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Either one.
She may have something to say. Well, again, good evening. So we have a site plan that we'll kind of walk through here. Again, this is the proposed conditions plan that we have, so a survey of the property has been done. Everyone is familiar with it, but just for those that may not know where it is, this is actually 141, this is East Hampton Road. You cross that straight through, it turns into Dwight Street, and then this is Northampton Street, or Route 5. So the parcel we're talking about is where the Lynch School was formerly sitting, and it actually, you can see the line kind of outlining the property through here. In the back of this is where all the soccer fields or the athletic fields are. That is not part of this application. So what we've done is we've looked at this and working with Eric from Frontier, tried to come up with a plan that plays to the topography and the use of the site. So what we have shown here is a proposed CVS. Right now, the building is being proposed anywhere between 13,000 square feet and 14,000 square feet. They haven't quite decided on which prototype that is going to fit on this property yet. We are just showing a fast food development in, I'm sorry, am I in your way?
I already saw them.
Okay.
6:30 this morning I reviewed them.
Okay, I just thought about that. I have my back to you, so yeah, let me just, yeah. So we are proposing a fast food or a restaurant type in the back, but we have no, that's just a standard building that we're showing right now. So kind of walking through the site, everyone is familiar that as you come down 141, this is actually leading from I-91. There's a couple exit ramps further up to the west. So what we're proposing here is an entrance only into this parking lot. We've evaluated for full access, basically a right in and a right out. But it doesn't work. So we're just having the ability to pull in. The state DOT layout actually ends at this dotted line right here. So this would be a curb cut that would be permitted locally through the Department of Public Works and the Planning Board. As you go further into the intersection, we actually hit that intersection. There's other developments. The fire station is located on that corner. If you turn the corner, we're proposing a new curb cut right next to the abutter. That is currently proposed as a full access curb cut, right in, right out, left in, left out. And again, as you go further on, you get to Anniversary Road, existing municipal roadway. You can come up through here, And again, we have another full axis proposed on that, right in and right out. We have some traffic numbers that we have run on that, and I'll kind of go through the plan first and then talk about those aspects of it as we get forward. So from a parking perspective, we've looked at this and we've analyzed this from what is required by code and what each tenant or development may need. So the CVS development actually is proposing about 79 parking spaces. The restaurant back over here is actually proposing about 24. The site in general is 2.8 acres. CVS is about 2 acres, and with just shy of an acre being for the remaining piece. The standard CVS prototype is shown here. Parking adjacent to the building, ADA access, all flush, so there's no tripping hazards. Parking here, a center row of parking, and then parking along the frontage. And as we don't have a prototype here, we're just showing parking where we can fit it in, so this will most likely be modified. If you note the dark box here, what we're proposing there is the location of a potential underground stormwater management feature. We've done a number of projects in Holyoke, and we are familiar with the stormwater management regulations. As a redevelopment project, we're required to reduce stormwater coming from this site by 25%. If you've been on property, you know that it's pretty much 100% paved right now. It's mostly the building, and then everything else is pavement. So when I flip the plan, actually I'll do that right now, you'll see that we are actually adding a substantial amount of green space throughout the site. We could have taken this, we could have extended it to the rear and then extended all the paving, got more parking in here. We tried to take a conservative approach to that because when we introduce pervious area into a site, that is an automatic reduction in the amount of stormwater that's generated. So that alone will actually reduce the stormwater coming off the site and entering into the municipal system. As we looked at the survey, we don't show them on this plan, but all the utilities for the project are available in the immediate vicinity on either of these roadways. Anniversary roadway is being looked at for water. There's sewer on Route 5, and we're not really planning anything off of Route 141. From a traffic perspective, we have done a quick analysis of what this site will generate, and Attorney Wilson will be, I guess he's going to pass those out.
Sorry, I didn't make enough for everybody, but I just pass them to.
Thank you. Thanks.
All right, so while that's being passed out, on the permitting side of things, the traffic will be the and how that is managed will be the most important part of the development here. There will be some Mass DOT and state oversight as far as that whole process goes, and I'll walk through that. But in general, what we've done at this point, and I just want to preface what was handed out, that this is just a snapshot of the traffic right now. It does not include anything that is needed for a full traffic study, which would include a safety analysis, a crash analysis, levels of service at the intersections, the functionality of the signals. All that has to come at a later date. This is just to kind of give you an idea of what could happen. So if you go to page 3 of that report, you should see a trip generation estimate in a chart form. And at that point, this is really the most important piece. Typically, when you do a traffic study, you look at the use that is already there, and then you are usually allowed to take credit for the trips that are being generated by that development. So if there was a store there already that was generating traffic, you look at this analysis from the aspect of what new traffic is being added to the roadway network. On this site here, the school has been close along. There's generally no traffic that we can take credit of, which is evident by what we're showing in this chart. So again, with the CVS, with the drive-through, we were conservative on this. You'll notice that we went to their biggest prototype, which is 14.6. So you can see that the weekly daily is the first item that we look at when we do a traffic analysis. So this is expected to generate 1,415 cars per day. I'll talk about the other numbers, and I'll tell you, then I'll go back and say what those numbers mean. The fast food restaurant with the drive-through, which is about 4,000 square feet, which is what we're showing on this plan here behind the existing use, actually generates about 1,985 vehicles per day for a total of 3,400. So the questions are always asked of where those numbers come from. So when you do a traffic study, the Institute of Transportation Engineers publish a volume of different uses throughout the United States, and there's surveys that are done. We go to that and we try and use the land use codes that most apply to this. So if you look at the bottom of that chart on footnote 1 and 2, it tells you the land use codes that we use to generate those numbers based on square footage. What you'll also notice is if you look at the column that says pass-by trips for that item, all across that top line, it has NA there. So what we are looking at is that from a state permitting perspective, the state does not, Mass DOT being the state and MEPA, does not want the traffic numbers messed with by looking at potential pass-by trips or a reduction of traffic that could come off of here because of a previous development. These are just pure numbers. That's what the state evaluates it as. So when you look at that new daily trips of 3,400, that tells you that as far as this development goes, there will be state oversight going into the full development. We will have a full traffic study that we have to do. We have a filing with the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act at both the ENF and the EIR level. ENF being Environmental Notification Form, EIR being Environmental Impact Report. That's about a 9-month process, and it gets into everything you would ever want to know about this property and what could potentially happen to it. All the state agencies and the town agencies are brought together through this process to discuss the potential impacts, what they see as potential impacts maybe outside of this study area. So there will be a more in-depth traffic analysis and analysis of this property on all levels. Environmental, there's no wetlands here, but wetlands actually has a piece of this. Stormwater management, everything is evaluated. So it'll be a very, very thorough study that's done for this property. So then going back to table 1, just briefly, we then break down into the next couple of items that are important. You look at the weekday peak hour and the weekday evening hour. So you can see that it's broken down by the use. The CVS is 25 entering the site in the morning and 25 leaving. The fast food is 90 entering and 90 leaving, which makes sense with what you would think of how a fast food restaurant might operate in the morning during a peak hour. Then it gets into the evening. You can see the numbers kind of get more equalized, 75 entering and 70 leaving for the drive-through, and fast food is 70 entering and 60 leaving. And then we get into the last matrix, which is basically the Saturday midday. So from that aspect, again, we've looked at it. We do not anticipate that there are any major improvements that are going to be required on the roadway network here. But what we do anticipate is that the signals that are located at the intersection right by our front door, and the one that is just off of the picture here, which leads going up to the I-91 ramps, will be thoroughly evaluated. They'll be evaluated for capacity analysis. We'll look at the functionality of them. We'll look for things that are broken, that don't function. And it is understood that this developer will most likely be taxed by the DOT in the city to fix whatever is not functioning here. If the level of service drops, we would then look at what we can do within the corridor to improve that. We might do some signal timing adjustments. We're really constrained on right-of-way on both of these intersections on all sides, so it is doubtful that we would actually have any geometric improvements to perform here. We just don't have the room for them. So that's kind of an overview of that site plan. So again, looking at the colored rendering, you can see the pavement area, the divider strips, the planter areas, which are all green. CVS building in this yet to be determined restaurant building. So the last thing I have to share with you is a rendering of the latest CVS prototype. So for those of you that are familiar with CVS that is on Beach Street, you recall the building has a little bit of a different color. It is a yellow type of building with a red brick tint. CVS on this latest version of the prototype has actually toned it down. It's more muted, more earth tone. You can see this is an EFIS building. It's kind of a hardboard. It has color to it. This is a true brick frame around it. The CVS color, that yellow, is still as the backdrop of the sign. This is their standard prototype. It has not been tailored to the zoning codes for signage that is allowed. This is just, what a snapshot of what it would look like. This is the side of the building that would be facing Route 141 as you're coming down that road. This is the side of the building that would be facing Northampton Street, I believe it is, Route 5. This is the building that is actually facing the abutter, or if you looked through the abutter, this would be facing Anniversary Road. And this is the side that is facing the soccer fields. And just to note that if you were to look at the site, there is a large grade difference between this property and the soccer field. So that was one of the reasons why we also left this buffer area in the back. So what we're hoping to do is to lessen the severity of that grade difference. It's almost vertical now. There's some retaining wall on a portion of it, but we're hoping by having that green space there that we can make that transition. We're not going to get rid of the transition. The vertical difference is still going to be there, but we make it less severe. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have on this.
Counselor Lisi?
Thank you. So you had mentioned that the Lynch School takes up, the footprint of the school takes up the majority of the property. Do you have anything that shows a comparison between this layout and what is currently there with Lynch?
I don't have anything that shows the comparison, but readily. But if you were to, I think these were handed out. The existing Lynch School is actually shown and dotted here. I can trace it out with a marker if anyone would like to see that.
It might have been emailed by Ryan or myself.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Toby.
Yeah, I can easily trace it out too if that helps. It'll only take a second.
I'm not seeing copies. Am I missing anything?
We'll start with this, and then if you need it darker, we'll go. So this is the main part of the school, which you kind of see from the two roadways here. This is a little courtyard that exists between the buildings. It's kind of used for parking. It's a small, it looks like a former delivery area. And I think this might be the power plant portion of the building. I've never been in it, but just looking from the outside. It's a gymnasium. Yep. So all of this is paved back here. This is grass. I believe there's some walkways in front through here. But the majority of this from this site basically going back is pretty much impervious surface right now.
Thank you.
Counselor McGivern?
Thank you, Councilor Bacon. John, I know there are preliminary numbers with the, as far as traffic mitigation goes. When the city did an RFP, the response was more for a retail establishment with buildings that housed retail and parking with inside. This is slightly different, and my concerns are your numbers and how you get traffic off of Route 5 into this parking lot without any signals, without, especially a left-hand turn on Route 5 North. It's just your numbers alone, 1,000 cars a day for the restaurant part of it isn't going to happen. 2,000 total.
Yeah, again, this is all these numbers are intended to show is just what this site would generate from traffic. We have yet to get into the whole other piece of the traffic study, which gets from the distribution. If you look at it, people look at the numbers, I've got 2,000 cars coming to the site for this restaurant, and then they automatically assume they're all coming from this direction and going this way. There's a distribution that happens, maybe 50% of those, and there may be mitigation that we have to do at this roadway here. This whole corridor, being state jurisdiction, is going to be under a fairly decent amount of scrutiny from the DOT.
Which we understand, and we're dealing with that on Lower Westfield Road and Whiting Farms Road with a different development. But again, how are we going to get the traffic off of Route 5 is my question. And I'm assuming, maybe I'm wrong, but I know we're talking about use, but each of these proposals are going to be looking for a drive-through.
I can tell you CVS will be looking for a drive-through. I am uncertain about the restaurant. At this point, we're showing one, but we don't know, we have an idea. We don't know what that is, so we don't know whether there's one there. But we are showing one, and we understand that that process requires a permit by this board here to grant that. We haven't looked at the mitigation piece of this. There is room in the corridor here. We could stripe a left turn lane, create a left turn pocket to go into the site here. We could do the same thing over here. This may be a signal. It's all of that is yet to be determined, but we're not at that step.
Where you just put your left turn lane, currently there are 2 lanes. When traffic go through the intersection, they have a choice to make. If they're going north on Route 5, everybody wants to get into the right lane to continue to go north. Anybody else that wants to get on 91 or to go up East Hampton Road wants to get in the left lane. Right. And
it's tight.
There's a gas station. There's another 2 commercial buildings there on the right-hand side. There's the plaza. There's 3 commercial buildings on the left-hand side. So it's, the proposed use is what this is about. The RFP was about something a little bit different.
Yeah. I can't speak to the RFP. I can only speak to the use that we have here. But Eric, I don't know if there's anything we can add as far as, what the RFP was asking for? Or Mike? Yeah.
If
He wants to speak to the RFP question. Or he wants to answer the question?
Yeah, I don't have an answer for the RFP.
Sure.
I wasn't involved with the RFP, so I don't have anything there.
Well, I guess the response to the RFP indicated approximately 25,000 square feet of retail space. They provided an example of what that could look like, but they made clear that that wasn't uniquely what it would be. Here between both of them, John, I don't know if you have an approximation of total what it is. I know that for the CVS we have up to 14,000.
14,000, and at this point, the fast food is shown as a 4,000 square foot footprint. So
right. So it would be just shy of the 25. So
Yep.
it would be at around 18 to 19,000 square
Right.
feet.
The Frontier development, if the zone change passes, will the purchase and sale be satisfied, and will they own the property, or will they wait for site plan review?
After, assuming a zone change passes, the closing does not happen at that time. They would still have to accumulate all permits for the project before the closing. So that would include all state permits and all site plan review requirements, all special permits. For example, if there's a drive-through, that would be a special permit through the city council as well, before the closing.
And will CVS be closing any other stores in Holyoke?
At this point, there's been no discussion of any closings on any of the other stores.
So this is about more than use.
I'm sorry?
This is about more than use. Well, it's a zone change, but the RFP and the, the proposal with the developer was a unique piece of property to bring in retail into an area with difficult traffic mitigation questions that we understood. And we've changed that, significantly enough to where I think these questions need to be answered before we can address the zone change.
Could you repeat the question, though? I'm just not.
How are we getting traffic off of Route 5 is my first question, without causing a monster problem on Route 5. Secondly, will Frontier purchase the property once the zone change is completed without site plan review?
I believe they're going to be honest with you, everything, permitting and everything, site plan review is a major part before we get into this. I mean, if you're talking about site plan review could change the way this whole project looks. So of course they're,
Attorney Wilson, you stated at the beginning, this is about use, not about the project, but it's a lot more about the project.
But I guess what I meant by that is any retail space with that kind of configure could have the same traffic issues. This traffic is not mainly because of this particular project. The way this is any project, even more what everyone, in the RFP, the traffic issues would still be here.
Unique traffic issues is the point I'm making. And I think we need a full-scale traffic study before we get into a zone change.
Yes, yeah, there'll be a full traffic study, but the typical, I guess, procedure is that that's extensive and it's a time commitment, and going through that process and not knowing if you have a project or not is a big.
Understandable.
Yeah.
And this is a major development, and I'm all in favor of this property being developed, but it needs to be done correctly with the unique circumstances coming off of state property, coming onto Route 5, which is city but state property itself, although it's city controlled, and already existing conditions that are difficult to maneuver as it is. And if we're going to change the use of this property, I think we need to have a full plan answer as to how Route 5 is going to work. Thank you.
Mr. Kelly?
Just kind of continuing on Councilman McGivern's remarks, when you look at, commercial development, traffic is going to be an issue no matter what kind of project is proposed. And keep in mind, with this proposal, there's going to be two new kind of entrances cut off of Route 5. There's already an existing commercial entrance that is shared by the restaurant and a bank. And the other side, there's another commercial driveway entrance that is used by the motel and the bank. So in that short span of, on the east side of Route 5, from, let's say, the Dwight Street intersection to the Hamden Street intersection, you're going to have, under this proposal, almost four, commercial driveways that are going to have a heavy amount of use. So in my mind, the trick, and we're only talking about use, but the trick of converting this and using it for retail space, I think you have to take into consideration what you're going to have along that entire the entire stretch of Route 5. And you're going to have people trying to take left-hand turns going north into 1, 2, 3, or 4 locations, or coming out of any of those 4, taking a left or right turn onto 5. So I don't know whether, some creativity could take place whereby there's some right-of-ways, there's some sharing. We don't have to have, maybe we can cut this down to, whatever is developed there, into, if you go from 4 to 3, that's a huge, reduction in the amount of congestion that's going to occur in that section of Route 5. So again, I think it's great. We're looking at some development, some jobs, but we've got to really be concerned about traffic coming in and out on that side of Route 5. And then you've got Beacon Avenue on the other side, and you've got the other shopping center on the other side. So there's got a lot of, commercial traffic kind of entering and exiting properties in a very short distance.
Councilor Jourdain?
The last two speakers basically encapsulated a lot of my thoughts and questions, but back to something that I heard, John, is the issue here is eventually you have to do this traffic study anyways. And I guess the question is, if it has to be done anyways, perhaps it's best that we just, since traffic is so central to this heavily congested corridor here, and I think we're going to see, because I'm kind of interested to know, all right, so you're going to add 3,400 trips to this location. What's already there now? I know 141 has a significant amount. Northampton Street's got to be, probably 10,000 coming up and down, maybe more than that per day.
Good guess.
Yeah.
Northampton Street has 16,000 average daily trips.
Oh, okay, that's good.
And East Hampton has 9,800.
800, okay.
Yeah, Route 141.
Okay. So, obviously a lot of movement going there, every day. Is it possible, what's the thinking behind, let's do the traffic study after the zone change, but before site plan review? Is it that the worry is, well, if we don't get the zone change, therefore we don't want to spend the money on the traffic study? Is it that kind of a thinking? Or, because at some point it has to be done anyways. Wouldn't it seems like this is going to be one of the main sticking points in this notion of, is this a good use for this location? And how does that all factor into our decision?
Sure.
To grant a zone change? So it would seem like that's something that needs to be done earlier in the process. But did I hear you right say something that could be 9 months to do?
Yeah, so let me elaborate on that a little bit more. So part of the reason to hold off on the traffic study is because without the zone change, we don't know whether we have a project or not. And if we do the traffic study, provide the information, and the zone change is denied, that is a cost that is unrecoverable. The bigger part of it is that the state DOT has a new process that that was enacted in November on how they conduct traffic studies when it ties into the MEPA process. So we have to engage them early in the process. We meet with them. We talk about the corridor, what they want to have as a study area. And that engagement does not start until we enter the MEPA process. So what we'd be asking for would basically be two studies. We'd be doing a study that would follow our best guess on what the study is, and that may or may not provide the answers that you need. Then, if we're fortunate enough to get the traffic study, we then enter that state process with the DOT, and it could be an entirely different study. So it is true that without having the zone change in the appropriate zone, it is a cost, but the other part of it is that the state involvement puts a level of complexity on this project that very few other ones in town have. Because we're on state layout, they have to get involved. And then we have to actually apply to them, and we can't apply to them until we know we have a project. So it's kind of a chicken and egg type of thing.
Can you do a mini version of that then, to the extent that you can? Obviously, you would retain some firm to do this traffic study, obviously, because I'm sure there's experts in these fields. Can they do something that does not necessarily meet all of the state requirements, but would likely produce all of the type of information the city council would need to make a reasonable decision on this, and hopefully maybe some of that work product would be beneficial down the road? Not quite, because I think it's in part some of that, but I have other questions about, how much the traffic is going to flow into the different locations. It gets a lot more intense. Why is the building located where it's located? What type of volume? What impact do these different on and offlets have to all of the remainder of the traffic around it? Those we now know 3,400 is what they're projecting. Absolutely, Eileen. I agree with you. So we do have that answer. Now the question is, what does that do to the radius around it is kind of what I'd like to get into a bit. So at least on that point.
Yeah, so to answer the first part of your question is VHB would be the firm doing the traffic study.
Okay.
Our firm was founded on transportation engineering, so we are the people that do these, and we also do the land planning of it. Having the two functions perform together is a benefit because you can see how the site reacts to where the access points are located. So having those two functions under one roof is the best possible scenario. To answer the second part of your question, an interim study could be prepared, and that is kind of what I said, is that we would have a study that would kind of address some of the points of what a complete study would be, that this does not. And I started off by saying that this is just a snapshot of it. It's missing the distribution, it's missing the safety analysis, it's missing the level of capacity. That's just something that we prepared just to give the council an idea of what this site was going to generate. Sure. Whether it can be used over again as part of the second study, we won't know until we get into the state process.
Thank you.
Eileen?
Yeah, my first question is Anniversary Road a city road?
Yes.
It is. Because it is in need of some pretty serious improvement, particularly if, that corner is going to be developed. Is that part of this project?
It would be.
Okay.
As part of the analysis that we would look on, if we're proposing an access off of that roadway, as we are, we can't just end it at the gutter line and say, you're on your own. We have to look at it, and we have to make sure that anybody using this section of roadway, it's safe for travel.
Because it is in pretty poor repair, as I recall. But I do see that, Councilor Jordan and Councilor McGivern, as a possibility to get us to where we need to go, is to improve Anniversary Road and get some of the traffic off of Route 5. And John's suggestion, too, to, make some access to what is left between, the old Lynch School property and the I-91 ramp, the Chinese restaurant and the bank, and, to have maybe some access in the rear off of Anniversary Road again. I don't know. I mean, it's just... I think Anniversary Road might be the ticket to getting us where we need to go.
Counselor Sullivan?
Yeah, thank you. I think we're getting a little too hung up on the traffic thing right now. I did just some quick basic numbers here for everybody. First of all, if the place was only open 10 hours a day, to make my math simple, we're talking about 6 cars a minute, all right? And that's assuming that every one of those cars is a car that would have never been heading in that direction anyways, not somebody on their way home that lives off of Route 5 up in Ward 7 or down on the other side of the highway, or just traveling on their way home to East Hampton up over the mountain, or coming into work, coming through Hoyoke. So it doesn't necessarily add all this to it. And when you look at those numbers, regardless of whether it's retail or whether it's a CVS Pharmacy or whatever it is, the issue here is a zone change. And before any of this other stuff goes forward, we got to decide whether it's retail or whatever it is. We got to get on. They need to know, are we going to change the zone? And I think we're making too much of an issue of the traffic.
Thank you. Mr. LaChapelle?
I would only say that for Anniversary Road, it'd be very important to keep in mind that during football season, there's a tremendous amount of traffic up there. From parents and kids, there's a ton of traffic going up and down that road from August to November.
Counselor Lisi?
Thank you. I have a question for either Marcos or Jeff. Under our current zoning ordinances, is BH the only retail designation business zone that would allow for a 14,000 square foot commercial building and a 4,000 square foot commercial building as it's laid out here?
Probably not, but from a planning standpoint, you have a commercial zone that encapsulates everything off that highway exit, and it's business highway, and this is a business right off the highway. I mean, it's kind of like, it comes from the I don't know if it was from the city's master plan, but that whole corridor is business highway to the north, to the south, to the east on Dwight Street. It would just be an expansion of that zone, and it would be an affirmative determination that the commercial aspects of that zone is just being expanded onto that property.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who has a question? Is there anyone from the public who would like to speak in favor or against this project tonight? Yes, sir. If you would come to the microphone and just give us your name and address for the record.
Bill Radner from American Rug Company, and I'm adjacent to Walgreens, which would be diagonally across the street. And I have a good eyesight view of the parking lot. Walgreens, see all the traffic at Dunkin' Donuts in the morning that I can venture to say will have more business than this project will. There's people lined up all over Route 5 in the morning, and there are no accidents. So we manage. It's something that is good for Holyoke. It's a little bit awkward, but it works. But Walgreens has maybe one car a minute leaving, if at most, from that location. And that's a good-sized Walgreens store. Rite Aid, 2 cars maybe. In a minute, maybe 2 cars. So I don't know how we're getting thousands of cars unless you have a whole city with a movie theater and this. I can't imagine how people are going to be lined up with one after another when you've already got 2 pharmacies within a block. I mean, people aren't that sick. I mean, unless we have some, I don't know. There's 2 other CVS's in Holyoke. I think it'll be manageable. And I think the more you put it off and you take 7 or 8 more months and another year, nothing's generating any business. I think if you have to go through a couple of other stumbling blocks, rezone it, and then evaluate that when the time comes. But I can understand how they don't want to not have a firm commitment. I mean, that's an expensive thing. Or the city should kick in half the cost. If they're that concerned, split the cost of the survey. But you have to keep things moving. I've been looking at a vacant building for 9 years already. You know, it's enough. We got to move. Although, I mean, Chicopee has BJ's, FL Roberts, Speedway, CVS, and Walgreens all at one corner. Now, I'll say the traffic lights are 2 minutes, and it's a little awkward, but it's manageable. It works. That's off Montgomery Street, and they're doing tons of business. And the city is thriving. We've got to move forward. And that's my opinion. I see what's going on. The gas station across the street from me is a huge help. That's going to bring people in. I know Eric Shore will probably develop if something happens across the street. So it'll spark everything. Everything will start moving, and Holyoke will be on the map. So we just can't put off another year or 2 years. It's not going to get any easier. So whatever it takes, it should be started. That's my opinion.
Thank you.
Good evening. Helene Florio. I'm president of the Holyoke Taxpayers Association. I live at 31 Wellesley Road in Ward 7. And I just want to reiterate basically what Mr. Radner has so eloquently put here today. And I have to say that I support what Mike Sullivan has brought forward. I think the first order of business is that we have to come and make sure that the zoning is approved. And then we can get into the minutia. It all has to be taken care of. I agree with that. But I can understand where I don't think any corporation really wants to do all of that investment if they don't have any guarantee that the zoning's going to go forward. And I think that our organization that has had conversations with the city council through the last few years, zoning is a very big issue, and sometimes we get hung up on it. I would like very much to see this go forward, and I hope that you're able to do that this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any,
I'd like to make one more comment if nobody else is speaking.
oh, no? Oh, Counselor Lisi?
Thank you. I think understanding that the rest of the corridor along Route 5 is currently Zone BH, I think it makes intuitive sense to continue the zoning and make everything continuous and contiguous. And I've tried in other parts of the city to initiate the same type of zoning logic. And when I see the plan here, I just get a little bit concerned about the first impression that we're giving folks coming off the highway and seeing Holyoke for the first time, because I do think that there's a lot of parking and pavement that's right up against, the streetscape where people would be driving by. And one of the other orders that I filed that I think that we should be looking to make progress on is one that looks at all of our retail zones in comparison to one another to make sure that we're creating design standards that work for the areas that they are intended to be placed. So that if we have, a BH corridor and Business Highway is where we want to see this BH corridor, parcels that are near the highway, and where we can also put business and retail, commercial activity. I'd like to be able to say very confidently that in those areas that are going to be our retail gateways, that they have particular design standards so that we can control the type of development that's coming in here. Again, I think that the BH zone makes intuitive sense, and I hope that at some point we can take up the orders that I filed related to the different commercial zones in the city so that we can make sure that they are providing the design standards that make the most sense for where they are intended to be placed throughout the city. Thank you.
Mr. Kelly?
Yeah, I just want to, I think that the remarks that have been made relative to that, the fact is the first step really should be the zone change, and we should be focusing on a zone change for that piece of real estate. Discussions around traffic, again, I just want to be clear that those are just challenges that are going to come, with whatever development takes place there. But clearly, we'll be focusing on, I know the planning board, on a recommendation relative to a change in zone period, which brings a lot of different uses. But I think we have to keep in the back of our mind that traffic is going to be kind of a challenge to us relative to any development that goes in there. But clearly, I think others have said we're probably a little bit ahead of ourselves when we start getting into, who the tenants may or may not be. So, again, I just want to remind everyone that those who've said it is about a zone change, about use, is what we should focus on first.
Thank you. Mr. Marrero? Counselor McGivern?
Thank you. No one has spoken against this project. I think most of us have supported this development from the beginning. This is not the first time, and correct me if I'm wrong, John, but you've worked on a number of projects in Holyoke. Okay? And maybe it's because the state has changed the process, but we've always had a lot more up front before we voted on the zone change. We've always known whether it was the Atlas Coppo project, whether it was a project off of Balboa Road. We had an idea of a lot of what was happening on and off the highway, an idea of how to handle it, an idea of what changes. You mentioned mitigation by the developer and whatnot. And this is our only shot at the apple. If we want to say something about traffic on Northampton Street, and it's a unique piece of property I really want to see developed for all the reasons we've heard this evening, I think this is the time that we ask the difficult questions about traffic. Because without a lot of consideration, it's not Route 5 South that's going to be the problem, it's Route 5 North. And, we've been given a lot more before we voted on the zone change. This is the least amount, and I don't have anything in front of me, but this is the least amount of proposal of proposed traffic mitigation we've seen for a zone change of this magnitude since I've been on the board. And that's where my questions are coming from. I'm looking for more on the traffic part for a unique process that we have to get people in and out of on a daily basis.
Thank you. Mr. Marrero?
So I'm sure John can elaborate a little bit on what I'm going to say, but I want to put the councilors' concerns at ease, because obviously traffic is one big concern that we would have. This is absolutely not the only bite at the apple that the council or anyone in the community would have. This only determines use, that we can go forward with a commercial retail use at this site. After this, everything starts kicking in as far as design. The MIPA process is a public hearing. The drive-through is a city council permit where traffic is particularly addressed. There's a site plan review process. All of that has to happen before there's even a possibility of closing on the site. The developer cannot close on the sale without those permits being in place. I'm glad you brought up Atlas Copco as well, because in that case, there was a separate city-state project for the upgrades on the intersection. And in fact, what happened there was that in the iterative process of figuring out that intersection, the entry and exit ways of the Atlas Copco site had to be modified. My concern with trying to resolve traffic before there's the established process in place is that we won't be able to resolve it unless we go through that iterative process. The solutions that are yet to be found will depend on, where is the driveway, what's the optimal location, what type of infrastructure upgrades would be needed, what are the opportunity costs, what are the infrastructure costs, how do we need to modify the design of the building. We would be putting completely the cart before the horse if we look to absolutely resolve or even have a very, very good idea of the traffic issues before even deciding whether we want to have a commercial use. So I just want to, again, put the councilors' concerns at ease, everyone here, that traffic is something that we take seriously in planning, but resolving that outside of a well-established broad participation process would be putting the cart before the horse and ultimately probably counterproductive to actually finding the optimal solution.
Councilor McGivern?
Respectfully disagree with Mr. Marrero. And I'll tell you why. Because outside of, if there are, we're told that CBS usually wants a drive-through, outside of a special permit for a drive-through, we have no other votes as a city council. And I think, this is from years of seeing this happen, and the reason we had to do that city project up by Atlas Copco is because of all the mistakes that were made over the years, whether it was the development of the mall, the development of Balboa Road, the development off of Whiting Farms Road. We had to fix it. And if we're saying that we should do this first and then fix it, I think we've learned from our mistakes in the past. Let's get it more upfront in terms of how we're going to handle the traffic before we decide we want retail and commercial development on this property.
Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Jordan?
Yeah, so let's just cut to the chase. Go do the interim traffic study. Let's start there. We're going to take under advisement, at least certainly that's how I'm going to vote here momentarily, to, unless there's other people that want to speak as to why we should or should not do this, but it seems like we've listened, we've got the preliminary things, some things were emailed to us today. We're taking under advisement everything that you have said. Don't spend too much money on the study, but within reason, but I think some additional information would be helpful. We'll be able to make an intelligent and informed decision. We'll also be able to take away from this meeting and discuss all of this with our constituents and other people who live in this area and all of that, and we'll make a deliberate and thoughtful conclusion to this, right? We're certainly not going to take a vote tonight. I don't know if there was any expectation of that.
Just as a point of information, in terms of process, tonight is the public hearing. Each body may or may not vote to close the public hearing, after which we won't take in any more information. After that, this committee will be waiting for a recommendation from the planning board. After we receive the recommendation, then the committee will recommend to the council. That's just how the process works. So we won't be taking a vote tonight, except for maybe closing the public hearing. But to that point, pardon? Correct, but I mean, that would be the only thing we
Okay.
could potentially do
Right.
if we
So
weren't waiting for more facts on the question.
But I think it's our intention to keep the process moving, but
Right.
we will review these things and make an intelligent and informed answer, correct?
Correct.
I just-
Attorney Wilson?
Two things, maybe three I'd like to say. First of all, and maybe Mr. Burkott and Mr. Morero can correct me, and please do, with the Whitings Farm Road, Gary Roan project, we did the traffic study after the zone change, was that correct? Okay, that's number one. Number two and everything is, it sounds like, and this is my question, for my own witness, for lack of, because I'm not used to but I believe that the interim traffic study is on top of the state one, which, to my understanding, is much more severe than, or as severe as anything the city will give us. Is that correct?
We're looking for something reduced in scale. I think that point was made.
Okay, is there such a thing that we can do? There is. Okay. All right, I just want to make sure that you're asking. something that
Sensitive
can
to
be
the
done.
cost point, sensitive to these points made earlier.
I just want to make
yeah.
sure that this
Yep.
is something that could be done.
Yes,
So that's my question.
excellent.
Are there any other comments or questions from the public? Yes, Mr. Radner.
Okay, if you don't change the zone and they decide basically that they don't want to be there, you aren't even going to get any other company that's going to want to come in because they're going to say it's not zoned. So if you even have a group of medical people who want an office, they'll say, is it zoned? No, it's not. They may not want to wait another year to get the zone changed. I mean, you've got to move forward on that. That doesn't mean they're permitted to do this. They've got 6 or 7 other things they've got to get by, but you've got to change the zone. Are you going to put it for retail or not? If you can't make that decision, it's a problem. Our tax base is so weak now, we're losing business. You can't wait 2 more years to get extra money in. We're at our limit. So you've got to do whatever's possible to get this going, just to change the zone, one thing at a time, but you've got to do that. That doesn't mean they're permitted to do it. Maybe the fast food will be the problem. That may be bringing in extra things. Maybe something else would have to go in there instead of that to reduce traffic. But you've got to know that it can be zoned. That's all. And I'm a businessman. I've been working for 43 years. I see what's going on. It's got to move quicker. It has to. So
Thank you. Eileen
Yeah,
Regan?
I would just like to state too that I agree that I don't think there's any question that this parcel is going to have to be zoned for some type of commercial development. So I don't see why we need to wait for a traffic study to move on the zone change.
Counselor Sullivan?
Yeah, and just to go with what Mr. Radner, Ms. Florio, Mr. Marrero, Mr. Kelly have said, we're talking about just a zone change, regardless of what went in there, whether it brought 1 car a day or 1 million cars a day. That we're wasting way too much time on this, on the traffic issue right now. Nothing happens at all if we don't do a zone. We're either doing a zone change or we're not doing a zone change.
Counselor Jordan?
Okay. We're obviously want to have this, to make all these different points, counterpoints, so I guess I have to now make a counterpoint to all this is, I've been around long enough to know that we have made so many disastrous zone changes in the past. Things that people are either running to change, we had people not be truthful to this committee, not be truthful to the city council, various applicants, that when they said we were going to come in with Project X, as soon as it was passed, they dumped out and went with Project Y. Totally different, changed everything on it. And then it went to this, and then massive neighborhood outrage, and then that went away, and then we ended up with Project 3. Where was that? Everybody ran up to the ribbon cutting, taxpayers, to chamber. Gary Rome, how many iterations of that project? That was a nightmare. That started from day one. That was going to be Lowe's. Do we recall that? The pro-business city council passed that. First shot through. That went on for what, 7 years later? They're just still building it now. So Is that the anti-business city council that, just pass it right away? Here we go, right out of the box. 7 years later, the thing is delayed. Not because of a vote here, but because of massive community opposition. We had the mayor come out and went to the press conference and said, Walmart's wonderful, can't wait to have Walmart. Then as soon as neighbors were against it, he then turned around and said, absolutely, I'll do everything in the power of my office to stop Walmart. So, I don't want to go through all of that again. I want to make sure we do it the right way. By any measurable standard, what happened up at Atlas Copco was a total nightmare. I voted against it the first time. Massive neighborhood opposition. Glad, I'd be happy to vote against it tomorrow again. Then Big Y said, we're going to do it. Everybody got on board, unanimous vote. Right away, right out of the box, just pass it like that. Then how'd that turn out? Is Big Y there yet? It's not. Now it's some charter school, and Lord knows what it's ever going to become. So the project, these things it's bait and switch. It never turns out to be what they say it's going to be. And it's not the anti-business city council. Let's just get that all straight. This notion, just pass it right out of here. Well, we fired those two out like, they were coming out of a machine gun, all right? And they never turned out. So very important project. Let's take all this here. Let's get all this information. Let's do it right. We will make a fast and deliberate decision. And, this notion that, let's just, right through. Let's be thoughtful in the approach. And believe it or not, there is a school of thought, not necessarily held by me, but there are a school of thought from others that don't want this zone change. I think you'll hear from some other city councilors and some people in the community that feel it should still be a school and it shouldn't be changed to commercial zone. So this notion that it's, a fait accompli, that this is going to happen, well, we'll see how that vote turns out. I'll be interested to watch to see if this gets 10 votes. We'll see. But stay tuned. Thank you.
Can I ask a question? Thank you.
Attorney Wilson.
Quick question is to Mr. Furman and everybody. I just want a timetable. How long will it take to do the traffic study? I'm just asking I'm asking.
Mr. Furman.
Yes.
Wanted to
Yeah.
weigh in.
Yeah, no, so a couple things. So the interim traffic study is useless unless we have current traffic counts. So the traffic counts will take up to a month to obtain. Because it's state highway, we have to pull a state permit to get the traffic counts. Then once we get that, we have to create a roadway network. We're doing that. Traffic study itself takes about 6 weeks. So from start to finish, you're looking at about a 10-week process for a traffic study. And that's not including all of the stuff that the DOT would want in addition to that. And if I could just address one thing about kind of categorizing the bait and switch type of thing. I know that VHB is one of the few engineers that it actually has ongoing contracts with CVS. We are certified to work on their projects. We have an internal process that we go through, and this is actually in active negotiations with CVS. It's not something we pulled out of a standard prototype and just threw on the plan. I believe there's a lease that is being reviewed right now. It's dangerously close to getting signed, but the zone change has a big impact on that. Because if there's not a zone change, they're just going to walk away from it because there's no project here. It's just kind of common sense. And just one other thing just to add is that I mentioned before, I'm not going to throw out a resume of all the projects that we worked on in the state and in Holyoke itself. Our office is right in Springfield. My folks grew up here in Holyoke. I'm invested in Holyoke. We've worked on some of the most complicated intersections in the city of Holyoke, one of them actually being the Holyoke Hotel right by the Ingleside Mall. We were very successful in that. We had the same discussions at the planning board level and the same discussions with the engineer at the time, Matt Sokoff, about the concern of that traffic. We initiated the reviews with the DOT. Again, it was under a different set of operating protocols. The DOT hadn't established those yet, but we were successfully able to design a signal that met DOT and DPW Holyoke. We have an agreement with the DOT to look at all those intersections as part of the mitigation project, do repairs and design a coordination plan for all of those signals. So that is probably one of the most complicated intersections in the city of Holyoke, and we were able to successfully manage that. While I agree that this is a unique project, a unique intersection with the traffic and everything out here, from a professional engineer, I don't see anything that is a stumbling block for determining an appropriate mitigation for this. And that includes, we have frontage all along the property. We can include, in concepts that we haven't discussed yet, which includes donating land to make turning lanes, limiting access to the driveways. All those things are on the table, but we are just at step one of a 20-step process, and we haven't got there yet. So from my professional opinion, we can make this work. Just great.
I would like to just say one more thing, Mr. Jordan, then I'll be quiet on this project, is I believe that the city council would have to vote to take that as back as a school. The school committee gave it up. I don't think that's as fait accompli, to use your French term. I congratulate you on your linguistics, but I just want to point that out, that it's not as easy as it's not, if this doesn't work, it goes right back to school. It's not like a reverter clause is my point.
That's true. That's true.
I would just like a motion to suspend rules so I can ask Kara a question.
Yep. Motion to suspend the rules to allow the law department to address the city council on this matter.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Kara, this is a technical question on the hearing. So the purpose of the hearing is relative to the zone change, but there have been the questions raised that people want the interim traffic study in consideration of the zone change. So as a technical matter, do we have to keep the hearing open in order to receive that information, or because it is sort of separate as a piece of the project, it would be a separate?
No, if you're going to consider it as part of the zone change, the hearing would have to be open and continued to a date certain.
Okay, thank you.
So John,
Hearing-
I'm sorry.
hearing no other-
How long did he reason, did he need a month?
No, he just said 10 weeks at least.
10 weeks?
So we're
10
looking at
weeks.
3 months from now.
Even a scaled back version of that?
Yeah, the good part of it, at least 4 weeks, is dealing with getting a permit from the DOT to put traffic counters out there.
Okay.
And that is at least a 4-week process all in itself.
Okay.
Once that data comes in, then it's just kind of the plug and chug of the numbers.
Okay.
So are we looking at the first week of June?
How did you get the
It's June-
16,000 and the
June-
10,000 number?
June 14th.
Mass DOT has a database of general numbers of highway volumes. For the traffic study, we can't use these numbers. What we actually have to do is put counters at every leg of every intersection.
To confirm those numbers?
To confirm the numbers, but actually determine which way people are turning. Because you have 9,800 vehicles on this road, you don't know how many are turning left, right, or going straight. And that's why the traffic counting program becomes extensive, because you have to determine how that distribution is being made.
Okay.
And then once that occurs, you determine how your distribution occurs for the new traffic coming in.
Okay.
I'm going to make a motion that we close the public hearing.
Do I have a second?
Not from me.
Fails for lack of a second.
I make a motion that we continue it for 1 month from, do we have a calendar date? And we will get an interim progress report, or then we can reevaluate at that time if we want to see perhaps you can give us some supplemental information at that time. A month from now, maybe it's not every left, right, and whatever. Maybe you have some additional, but instead of just pushing it out 10 weeks now, I'd like to give you the benefit of the doubt of maybe pushing it out a month, and then,
That would be the first meeting that we have in June.
that'll also give us an opportunity to review all of this and discuss it with constituents. I've just received this information over the last day. So to say that I don't want additional information is presumptuous, because once I begin to discuss this with constituents, they may want to come and testify. And if we close the public hearing, they will not be afforded an opportunity to do that. So,
So in the interest of both of those interest, if we went back to the schedule where we used to continue the hearings to the first meeting of the month, and that would take us into the beginning of May, would that
That would at least, I
make
think.
sense?
What's the date?
Well, we have to vote on whether we were gonna close the public hearing.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah.
It may close theirs,
Sure.
but we can, what
May,
would ours
May
look like?
17th.
That's our first meeting in May? May 10th.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
Okay.
Okay, I make a motion to be continued until May 10th.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'd like to make a motion to close the public hearing of the planning board.
All in favor? Aye.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Okay. It's bedtime, so I gotta.
Okay, thank you.
Couldn't hear you. They're leaving.
Two.
Action.
Can we just quick
Toby, you might want to hear this.
motion?
Motion to reconsider our action.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion that it would be May 10th at 6:30, stating we have to give the time as well, so.
To continue the public hearing till
continue
May
the public-
10th at 6:30.
Second.
Yep.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank
Sorry
you.
about that.
Hi, man. I'll see you.
How you doing?
I'll see you, Mike.
Yep, take it easy. I'll be in touch.
He just-
Regular order? Okay. Okay, so continuing on with our agenda,
Moving on to item number
Number
5. Okay, motion,
we're just going to leave it on the table. I have
yeah,
no update.
Counselor Roman's not here, no update, so we'll just leave that on the table.
Yep.
Do we have to make a motion, or we just don't
I
take it up
think
for
we have,
discussion?
well,
I'll make a motion to leave item 5 on the table.
all in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Numbers,
And should I read it into the,
nah. Well, you can go ahead, I mean.
Item 5 is we're leaving on the table because we do not have an update. Filed by Counselor Roman, ordered that residential-only parking signs be placed in front of 60, 62, and
That's on Hampshire Street, I believe.
Hampshire Street.
Yeah.
So I'll accept a motion and take up item 6 through 10 as a package. Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So these are the various solar pilot agreements. If I can do an abbreviated reading. These were filed by Counselor Lisi. One is for the Ryan and Boudreau LLC, care of Robert Baker. Item 6. Item 7 is the Holyoke and Din Brothers. Item 8 is pilot agreement between the City of Holyoke and the Forestdale Cemetery Association. Item 9 is a pilot agreement between the City of Holyoke, O'Connell Development, and item 10 is between City of Holyoke, Lawler, trustee of Timothy Lawler Trust of Alvord Place, South Hadley. And I believe that is for the solar facility located on the property at Martin Street. So those are the agreements
Yep.
that we have discussed previously, that we are following up on tonight.
Again, Attorney Thomas Wilson for SHR Energy. May I ask a question? Well, before, or if that's improper, I just have a quick question. Okay, if
Sure.
it's- Okay, we're,
We, hang on, we have a number of this.
Okay, I have a copy of
We
that.
do, you don't have that?
Yeah, thank you.
Have that? You got it? Yep. Yes, do you want to go
Just
over
to
them
clarify
with
one-
us?
may I
Because
clar-
we've just received them.
no, I know. I just want to clarify one thing in my own mind.
Okay.
We're here discussing the pilot agreements only, correct? We're not discussing zoning issues or issues of, we're just discussing I'm
Right.
just a little confused, that's all. Because every time somebody speaks publicly, they bring up the issues
Well-
involving zoning and site and everything like
This,
that.
this isn't a public hearing at this point anyway. This is just a debate
Okay.
of the
Yeah.
committee on the agreements that were put before us. And if the committee chooses to open it to public comment and take comments, we can. If there's information that you wish to, and the committee wishes for you to review it with us, I will see what the wishes of the committee are.
Thank
Sure.
you, I'm just glad now I understand even better. You answered my question.
Thank you.
Okay, okay.
Madam Chair,
Counselor Jordan.
you ready for a motion? Or do you want to have some more discussion?
We did take them up as a package, and we do have this information before us. And at least one of our members feels prepared to make a motion based on other discussion and a review of the information. So
Sure.
your
Okay.
motion is?
My motion is that item number, let's see, I want to make sure I get my numbers right. Item number 6, item number 8, item number 10 all be defeated, that the council not approve those pilots related to those 3 items that are in residential areas.
Is there a second to that motion? Second. Is there discussion on the motion?
Yes.
I'd like to also speak on the motion.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I?
Counselor
Yeah,
Jordan?
in support of my motion, I had the opportunity to have a really nice meeting with the gas and electric recently to understand more about the economics related to these. First of all, let me begin by saying the amount of money being offered in the payment of lieu of tax amount, which is approximately $3,250, according to a pro forma for a 650 kilowatt DC project, that if this is at this rate of $5,000 per megawatt be given, is wholly insufficient to offset to the community the noxious nature of it and to otherwise commensurately compensate the city adequately for the personal property taxes and otherwise tax revenue that we would need to derive, and that it is in fact quite a net negative to the community to have this most noxious of uses put there. For example, in each of these situations, it is pretended to, at behind Richard Eager Drive, in and around Whitney Avenue, to cut down all of this area and to put a solar area. I've received significant neighborhood opposition. Certainly, again, I do not represent any of these areas. I represent, and I'm pleased to represent Ward 6. However, I certainly do not turn a deaf ear to people that live in other wards. And this area of Ward 5, these people have made a significant investment. What little peanuts of taxes that would be derived to the community from this paltry deal is overall going to cost the city a significant amount of money in the lost residential values to their homes, as well as in the taxes that they paid, and serve as a loss if they ever, God forbid, ever tried to sell their home. Now, having said that, let me just double down on that statement at Rock Valley and South Martin Street. This is an area, one is not producing much by way of taxes now, and under this will not produce much of any taxes for 4 acres of massive solar field, which Lord only knows what this will turn into down the road, and is completely a negative to the community. So if they want this, then if we can only have this as not to give it a tax break, which is basically what we're giving it, versus the 100% tax that they would normally pay, we have that decision here under Chapter 59 to decide to give it this reduced tax at the pilot rate. Secondly, as far as South Martin Street goes, this is just completely over the top. They're talking about clear cutting a massive acreage to put in these solar panels. Neighborhood opposition there is, by my estimation, massive. I haven't heard anybody that is aware of this, and they have received peanuts for notice. So this is just sort of leaking out to them now, what is proposed, and the people on the other side on Woodland Street. You heard Beth Strykar's here, who lives on Woodland Street. I've received information from other residents around the South Martin area. I know Councilor Bartley, unfortunately, he is ill this evening, but he has told me neighbors totally against, he is totally against, by the way, any of these residential ones. And that this is absolutely in the best interest of the community to defeat the 3 of these residential ones without question and just outright. They're, quite frankly, they don't have enough money that I'm sure that they would be willing to pony up. So I'm not going to, I think a negotiation is pointless to get into, well, pay 50,000 a megawatt or whatever. I don't think they have enough money to offset what is going to be lost to these neighbors in terms of their quality of life. And so if we can only do one thing, which is not give them a tax break, and that they're going to have to pay the full personal property tax, then so be it. They have that, they're allowed to do that under law already. But I'm certainly not going to vote to give them a tax break when I know full well that the residents who are going to be affected by this are going to be suffering as they are and are going to suffer a major economic harm. This agreement does nothing to mitigate the lost revenue to the city in taxes that will come from this. And let me also point out, James Lavelle, manager, Holyoke Gas and Electric, said to me, I asked, what does this do for energy production in Holyoke? Doesn't move the needle, okay? De minimis public benefit. They're getting 6 cents from anybody that they're buying now already. So what deal that they're going to cook with this company isn't any deal better than that they're getting from anybody else. Zero public benefit, major public harm. This is a no-brainer in my opinion. Obvious, we should turn these 3 down. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Lisi?
Thank you. I have a question and then a comment. My first question requires a suspension of the rules, and it would be directed at legal.
Is that a motion?
Please.
All in favor to suspend?
Thank you. So Kara, I think that we keep on hearing the pilot being framed as a tax break, and I was just wondering if we don't approve the pilot, can these projects go forward at a residential tax rate without a pilot in place?
So it's not a tax break, it's a restructuring of the tax obligation, I think as the assessor explained, because you're just talking about personal property taxes, and the cost that's assessed is very high in the first several years, but by 5 years they depreciate to essentially 0. So in the long run, over the term of the 20 years, the city receives more taxes under the pilot agreement. There's 2 separate issues, and it was addressed last time as well, that there's the property tax and the personal property tax. So in some cases where and Tony gave that outline, And I think there's several where the parcels were residential or exempt, including Forestdale, that they would now be paying taxes at the commercial tax rate. The projects, once are approved by planning, can absolutely go forward, but it's a business decision of the applicant of whether paying that full amount of personal property taxes up front is worth it, essentially, for the project.
And so, like you said, the pilot works to restructure the payments so that in the long run, the city is actually making more money because it stretches out the payments over a longer duration of time. Because within 5 years, the value of that personal property depreciates to nearly zero. So really, the city makes out better in terms of collecting a commercial tax rate for the commercial use on the residential property, as well as increases the amount of revenue generated because we also have the generation or production fees, right? Because there's still going to be generation and production beyond the usefulness or I guess higher value of the equipment. The project will continue to generate solar energy.
Right.
And so we'll be able to collect taxes on that.
Well, that would be the gas and electric. There was, in the PowerPoint we gave you last week, there was a chart where if they're just taxed under the normal structure, it's like a decreasing slope in the amount of taxes that you get, whereas the pilot creates a flat line over the 20 years. So
Yep.
That's what you're trying to accomplish with the pilot.
Thank you. So that's the only question that I had for Kara, but I do want to continue. Nobody else wants to ask Kara anything?
Kara, was it 5 years or 7?
The depreciation, I don't know, I mean, that was in whatever information Tony provided, I believe.
6, okay.
saying
Just so we're getting our facts straight. And do we know what the commercial, on the total value is, what the commercial tax bill would be? Because, I mean, you opine on legal questions, not financial.
Well,
Are we getting a little bit out of our expertise?
well, in the PowerPoint, and I think Tony said last week, he gave you the breakdown of, I think most of the properties are already classified as residential, so.
I'm talking about the personal property portion.
Well,
though.
the personal property, you wouldn't pay any personal property for residential unless it was a second home, so.
No,
So the increase in taxes to the city is the change in the real estate taxes and the personal property taxes. I mean, all these properties would, right now, what these properties would be paying would be either residential or exempt, which would be nothing, and they wouldn't be paying any personal property taxes or vacant land. There's no personal property there.
No, my point is that if we decline these 3, they have to pay regular personal property tax if they choose to build anyway. Your point is correct, that they can continue to go forward. We have no say over that. That decision is under current law and is allowed. Although South Martin Street, by the way, hasn't come forward yet. But be that as it may, they would have to pay the full rate for personal property taxes. Okay. So my point is, if getting $1 today versus 20 years from now, $3,000, I mean, I'm sure we know discounted cash flows, $3,000 20 years from now is probably worth about, I don't know, $1,200 today. So this notion that is equal in money, just right off, I mean, if you knew nothing else other than that.
All in the information, I
Right.
thought
So is
the
there a
assessor
question?
prepared.
Are we?
Well, it's
I mean,
just
I don't
this,
think I can
I mean,
answer
under
the-
suspension, I just.
well, I think
wondered-
we should bring the assessor up. I see him standing in the hallway, but I mean, I'm listening to this interchange go back and forth like we're somehow, the statement was just made, this is by giving them this, they're paying more taxes. If they were paying more taxes, trust me, they wouldn't be here. And so I'm just clarifying some facts that are
They were
going back
paying
and forth.
more. It's that it's spread out over a long time period. The idea is that it's roughly equivalent to the same amount spread out over 20 years instead of the amount you would pay all up front within 5 years. I didn't mean to say.
Yeah, but
Meant that it was spread out over a longer time period instead of being front-loaded.
Okay.
That's the
Any
purpose
other
behind it.
questions for Attorney Cunha? Thank you, Kara.
Thank you, Kara. Finally, I just want to state that I think that the G&E worked really hard last April to work with the City Council and develop some boilerplate language for how to move forward on these types of projects so that the city could retain the reputation that we've been building as becoming more and more business friendly. It's not at the expense of the residents, in my opinion. It's passive solar. And so, you know, the G&E came in, they tried to work out some boilerplate language that would help expedite the process and routinize the process so that business can come through the city in a predictable manner. And that is good for the city because we set out the regulations early on, how we want the rules of the game to be set, and how we want you know, businesses coming to the city to work with the city on these projects. And here we are as a city council changing the rules of the game midstream. And I just feel that, you know, we're not applying the rules evenly. We're cherry picking. You know, 3 of these projects we're going to say, yes, you know, I'm sorry, 3 of the projects we're going to say no, we're going to take them offline, but these other ones we're going to say yes to. So they're all going to be negotiating the same rates within the pilots, and it just seems that there are other issues at play that are unevenly and unfairly plucking out these 3 projects to deny those pilots when the values and rates and everything that's set for the other 2 projects in this package are the same. Thank you.
Thank you. So, as the maker of the order relative to the zone change, I'm going to weigh in on this one. The solar projects that exist in the residential zone in Holyoke exist in Ward 5. They're not pretty. They have devalued the property around them, and they are not returning much in the way of taxes to the city. So, when we passed the solar ordinance, I was very much a part of that discussion, raised the question about it being in the residential zones. I had grave concerns about the impact, particularly in the RA zone, relative to this sort of fervor of green energy. We were one of the first cities to become a green city because we were pioneers, if you will, on the pilot agreements, putting everything in every zone as of right. And ignorance usually isn't bliss, and this is another example of it. We took on good faith, and probably it was good faith, given what was understood at the time that we crafted the ordinance, and we allowed it as of right in all zones. Fast forward a year later, other cities didn't interpret it the same way. They tested it in the courts. Their reasonable restrictions on the use of solar prevailed in the courts. And as does every city in the Commonwealth, we have the right to assure people who invest in our city in a certain zone that their zone means something. We have spent hours in this chamber discussing the importance of zone and the importance of use. Residential is residential. This is an industrial use that we allowed by right in residential zones because we didn't know any better. And trust me, if I had known we could restrict it then, I would have restricted it then. And once I saw court cases, I moved to file an ordinance where we could reasonably limit where these projects go. It is nothing against solar, but I would question anybody who would say clear-cutting trees to put up solar panels that are going to end up in a landfill in 15 to 20 years when they degrade is more green. And I would challenge you that it is not more green. Talk to the people who live on the side streets where they cut down all the trees, buffering them from 91. The noise is incredible. The trees serve as air purifiers, they serve as noise buffers, they serve as visual buffers, and I have presented to the planning board the visual buffers that do or do not exist with the solar projects. What is proposed is reasonable in the ordinance change, and therefore the motion to deny pilots is reasonable also. I will further state that it was represented to us that all these pilots were approved projects. I'm here to report to you that tomorrow night is a hearing at the planning board because one of these projects is seeking permission to fill wetlands. Now, mind you, there's people that live out in RA and they can't build a shed, they can't put a pond because of wetlands. This is before us tomorrow night at 6:15 is a hearing relative to filling wetlands, relative to the Whitney Road project. So it's not approved because it can't be approved without that permission, because the planning board can't approve it without the commission approving going against our own wetlands rules. The hearing's tomorrow night at 6:15. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Well, the Conservation Commission. I'm sorry, I misspoke about which commission, but it's relative to the wetlands, it's relative to our regs. The Martin Street proposal that was put before us the last time we talked about it had been filed to get approval that day. So these were not before us as approved from the planning board anyway. We were led, my interpretation of what we were communicated was to let us know this was the last step of projects that had already been approved. And it does not appear to be the case to me. I am fully in support of this motion, and just because we created a draft 2 or 3 years ago when something was brand new doesn't mean we don't have a responsibility to our constituents to review things and revise them when it becomes evident that it should be done. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I could, I
Councilor
want to make
Jordan.
one final point on the economics of these, that people really need to understand that there's really 4 parties to the transaction. And when we're looking at these solar fields, there's the developer, which in this case stands based on a pro forma that I saw from the G&E is somewhere in the vicinity of 20 to 21% internal rate of return. Number 2 is there is the property owner who they're either going to purchase the land from them or they're going to lease the property from them. And based at current market rates, that's somewhere in the vicinity of about approximately $40,000 to $50,000 an acre. So the landowner gets something in the vicinity of approximately $200,000. Something they're gonna gain on this deal significantly. The third party to the transaction is the Holyoke G&E. Now the Holyoke G&E is going to get the power at 6 cents, but you can't give me something I already have. Okay, so they're already getting power at 6 cents. Now the reason the G&E is supporting a lot of green energy, as I support solar, it's just a question of location. Is that we want to be with renewable energy. I mean, obviously, we have the great state grant that just recently came in for the dam. We have lots of locations that we could put solar. I could find, now, last time I checked, the sun shines downtown too, okay? All right, sun shines in the whole city. And if you want, I can point you out plenty of empty lots. I also could give you plenty of buildings. You're more than well. How about the Armory? Anybody want to tear that? It's already half down. Tear that down and make solar out of it. You're welcome to have that. No charge. So I'll save you $200,000. Put it towards demo and the rest. If necessary. The fact of the matter is now let's discuss the fourth party to the transaction. That's the city of Holyoke and what taxes we're going to get. You know, we're going to get $3,200. Gee, don't send it all in one check. You know? I mean, you got to be kidding me. Everybody's getting taken care of except the city of Holyoke. And did you notice that the state law requires a city council vote? That's what Mass General Law, Chapter 59. And once again, I'm having to give legal lessons here, no charge, on the fact that these require city council approval. But yet we're told, well, this has been in the making for years. You know, we're putting all these deals together. I guess nobody picked up the phone to call the city council. We're the approving authority, not Mayor Morse, not Jim Lavelle, not Lord knows who you talk to up in planning, Lord, you know, all these people. And then it's just, let's talk to all these, you know, very important, well-distinguished people. And then we're just going to throw them on the agenda and go, rubber stamp them right through. And oops, something happened. We actually found out what the heck these things are all about and actually found out what our authority is on these. And the good news is we were able to catch it in time. And help is on the way, as far as I'm concerned. So this is one step in sending a message that we're not going to, for $3,200, I am not going to destroy neighborhoods for $3,200. Good God, we're better than that, I hope. And that's what this city council is for. And to the people on South Martin Street who, add up the value of all their homes, isn't that worth something? These in Richard Eager Drive and Rock Valley Road and the quality of life, we got to look out for the whole community. There is plenty of spots if we want to put these things in. We supported at the Aegis Energy product. I voted to give Aegis Energy 10 years of no taxes whatsoever. Half of that is going to go, it's $400,000. Because why? It's a significant public benefit. They're going to clean up this huge mess down there, and half of it's going to end up as solar, acres of solar. Right here, I voted to do that at a cost of $400,000 in tax revenue. So the point is, where this is of strategic importance, we can do it, and we can do it without destroying our residential zones.
Councilor Lisi?
Thank you. I just want to make sure that, if Councilor Jordan is going to give out free law lessons, legal lessons, I'm going to give out a free history lesson here. The city adopted the Green Communities Act in 2010. And then many years later, in 2013, we worked with the G&E to create a boilerplate language for how we're going to create rates and language for these pilot agreements so that, again, they could be applied evenly across all different solar projects in the city. And so really, these have been quote unquote rubber stamped by the city council because we set off the parameters. We were just revisiting and reflecting on our work from this April 13th meeting where we set the boilerplate language. That's why these have been passed very easily and very quickly, because we had already been involved in the process where we set the parameters for what these pilot agreements were going to look like. And I just want to state that finally, by denying these pilot projects and giving the rationale that, it's because of zoning and protecting neighborhoods and et cetera, you're effectively using tax policy to regulate land use and zoning ordinances, which this is, I guess you can do it. You're doing it right now. And so the leeway is there, but that's not what we create zoning policy for. It's not what we create tax policy for. Thank you.
Councilor McGivern.
Just a procedural question. By denying the pilot, which is about taxes, does that stop the project from going forward?
No?
So the projects will still go forward without paying taxes?
No, they'll pay taxes, but the regular personal property rate.
Right.
They can do whatever they want. We have no say over that. We're just not going to have a pilot.
They'll pay property tax and the personal property rate.
Yep.
And the personal property rate, we're told by the assessors, will be based on a depreciation after 7 years. There'll be zero.
We don't know that.
The use.
I'm just saying maybe we don't know it, but the assessor told us that.
Well, yeah, we can get that going again if we want, but, how much that they'll pay, what's the value of it at the commercial tax rate, which is what personal property is at, which is $39 rate, and it'll be so much in year 1 and 2, and then eventually it does go down as the depreciation of the thing.
I'll accept a motion to suspend the rules so that our assessor can speak.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yeah, I would tax accordingly to form a list that they would file for personal property. The use of the property would change from, either exempt or residential to that industrial rate, commercial rate, and we would tax accordingly on the forms of list. If the forms of list merit that they use depreciation over the years, then we would tax accordingly as to what the formal list says. So those are all under the general laws, under
Right.
Chapter 50.
And you shared that with us in our last meeting.
Yeah.
Yes.
Tony,
and-
the value of the property, the value of the solar panels, did you not say at one time that depreciation is quick?
Well, it's quick. It would go over a certain amount of years, depending on, what the market rate for depreciation on those solar panels is. And their formal list, which they are required to file each year.
Thank you.
Yep.
And to that,
God,
I'll be right with him. I would like to comment on this. The key word that I heard was industrial use. They're gonna be taxed for industrial use because it's an industrial function. And we're talking about money being generated or the lack thereof for the city, and we're talking about a residential zone.
That's correct.
So I agree with my fellow counselor that zoning is important. And I think there was a fundamental misunderstanding as to how broad we had to be with this zoning ordinance when it was created. Or we never would have approved, trust me, the project on County Road.
Yeah, I mean, for our office, it's just all according to use.
Correct.
So the tax would be according to use.
So I think the point is made in that regard. But the discussion that we're having here is just simply on the pilots, the economics of them. I think Counselor Jourdain has made those points regardless of how we feel about where they would be or where they wouldn't be. But I wanted to make the point on the status of the projects also. 2 out of the 3 of them are not approved. So that's just the facts of the matter.
I'm gonna tax them according to what
Right.
I'm allowed in this room, so.
Exactly.
I'm going on your lead.
Yep,
Hear you.
got it.
Thank you.
I have a question for Tony.
Counselor Sullivan has a question under suspensions. Tony, don't leave yet.
Tony, this depreciation schedule, the 7 years, does that depreciate them to 0?
I'm not positive on the 7 years, but I'm sure the solar panels do depreciate at a rapid rate, and that's been, literature from the Department of Revenue.
Well, the depreciation thing, the rapid rate, and that's a accounting gimmick also to encourage people to do this.
That's right.
So, my question is, do we know when they depreciate it, there's a couple of different ways you can depreciate something, but quite often it's not depreciated to 0. If they've got a 7-year schedule, and let's say it was $100,000 investment, they can depreciate it to $50,000, and they can depreciate that $50,000 whether it's 5 or 7 years.
Down to 10, between 10 and 20% maybe for the solar panels. I'm not positive. I think it was, the guidelines were like 10 to 20%.
G&E told me 7.
7.
There's an accelerated
Yeah.
depreciation for these. But let's remember tax basis, and for income purposes and for this, your standard's full fair market value too. So that's a whole nother cup of tea. That's not IRS code.
Right.
Let's make that distinction for depreciation purposes.
Counselor Sullivan, do you have a question for?
No, I'm all set. Thanks,
Oh,
Tony.
okay.
Thanks, Tony. So my other is a question for the body here. We've got the pilot programs. Now, if we deny, they can come, just denying the project can still go forward. Could they also come forward with a new pilot, offering
Potentially.
more payment in lieu of taxes?
Sure.
So right now, all we'd be denying is a
This.
pilot based on $5,000 per megawatt.
Correct.
We could accept, if they wanted to come back with something that said 15,000 per megawatt, it could be reconsidered.
Correct.
Okay.
Hearing no more discussion, we have a motion before us on the table to deny the 3
Excuse me,
pilots listed. And,
I'm sorry. I understand this, but I'm gonna ask for a little lenience from the board. My client's been here, and he's heard accusals and everything like that of things that I think he should be given a chance to defend himself. I mean, first of all, nobody's seen any plans for these things. You're accusing him of cutting down trees and things, basically, you accuse him of being a capitalist, which I have nothing against, obviously, but he would like to just be able to defend himself in front of the body, in front of the people on TV from some of these spurious accusals.
Yeah, well, we're not in the business of, we had a meeting, Toby. He had ample opportunity to talk. This isn't going to be counterpoint. Move to Holyoke and you can run for my job if you want.
And
And
I
you,
don't
then
think
you can
where
come up here
somebody
and take
lives-
the votes. The fact of the matter is he,
Hang on. Hey, order, I will have order in this room, or we will have no further conversation on this matter. I am going to seek the advice of the committee in order for you to speak in this meeting as every other person who has spoken. The committee takes a vote to suspend our rules to allow a person to speak. You don't get to speak by yelling at me.
Yeah.
And I didn't accuse you of anything. So if you want to be heard, the way that you're heard is to request the body to suspend the rules to hear your point. Well, I guess I couldn't hear him because you were yelling.
I would motion to suspend the
So
necessary rules.
I am going to hear from my committee what they choose to do in this regard. I am hearing a motion.
Motion to suspend the necessary rules to allow members of the public to speak.
All in favor? Aye. You said you wanted a couple of minutes, you have them.
Thank the committee. A couple of things that my attorney kind of alluded to, and as a developer of many years, you're used to this to some degree, but there's usually an opportunity to get it straightened out. I have to admit, I'm a little disappointed here because there are numbers being thrown around, there are assumptions being made, okay? Councilor Jordan, have you seen a single schematic drawing?
I, sir, only was provided the information you gave me.
Okay, so how would you
However,
know, how would you know what we're going to cut or not cut?
However, I am familiar with the fact that these exist in other locations. I am familiar that trees, you're not putting them on top of the trees, and that this is proposed as a large acreage, ground-based, ground-mounted facility. There are trees in the location that you want to put it. I have also spoken to officials at the Gas and Electric who have been in direct communication with you and who have provided me significant information, including a pro forma for a 650 kilowatt facility. Thank you.
Well, I can't speak to that because I wasn't present, but I was aware that you did meet with them. I also don't know where you're getting these numbers of what we're paying these landowners, okay? That number you quoted before was flat out inaccurate. What SHR Energy makes, I believe you said 25%, which is flat out inaccurate. Two, Jim Lavelle would not have that information simply because it's proprietary, all right? So what I am uncomfortable with is you making unsubstantiated statements against myself, my intentions, and my business. I'm welcome to have a discussion with you at any time. We have brought drawings down to the minutia, okay, to address some of these questions. Also, I have to say, this is a financial discussion, and it has consistently been muddled, like Ms. Lisi said, with zoning, with other issues that have nothing to do with taxation. Absolutely nothing. Furthermore, I have to be honest with you, Ms. Faken, from very beginning, you have tried to block a solar project way before SHR Energy came into town, okay, 5 years ago. You also made public statements at a planning and zoning meeting trying to block these projects. I think it's kind of interesting that several people on this board who are going to make a taxation decision have already been publicly saying we're against these projects for zoning reasons. However, SHR Energy followed the letter of the law. So when that was unsuccessful, now you're going to play with the taxes. Let me finish, please.
Well, you are making statements about my positions, and if you are going to stand and rebut statements, then I will do the same. Under our current zoning ordinance, there are considerations that can be taken by the planning board if they choose to exercise their discretion. I am an elected person from Ward 5 where 2 or 3 of these projects exist. Constituents contact me about them. They had concerns under the current ordinances. This isn't just about money. It's about the project. It's about all the things that we read out earlier under the public hearing. And if you want to talk about timing, well, we learned legally things could be different. It was way back in December I filed the order to change the ordinance. So if people are discussing ordinances and pilots, it's because it's been on the table since December, before these ever came to us. So that's why you're hearing discussion that's going from one part of the piece of the action to the other part of the action. But the pilot is about money, but the discussion and the decisions of the planning board, where I weighed in appropriately, were about what discretion they could exercise under the current zoning. And I still maintain they could have exercised that discretion, as they did in Chicopee, where they voted down a project. That's my right, that's my job. That's what the people elect me to do. So, that's fair,
All I'm
but
saying
that's
is
public
there's a lot of
information.
muddling between the two issues, okay? And that makes it very confusing to anyone who's trying to gain knowledge. So I
Well-
think we all have a responsibility to keep them absolutely separate. There will be times when those things can be discussed. Furthermore, as Councilman Lisi said, in 2013, 2014, the Finance Board approved these pilots after listening to hours and hours of research from HG&E. Mr. Jourdain and yourself were on that Finance Board, and you agreed that the 5,000 per megawatt was a fair rate. Now, it takes 1.5 to 2 years to develop one of these projects. So, at the moment you approved that, SHR began to work with landowners, engineers, lawyers, HG&E, all sorts of parties based on the fundamentals, as Ms. Lisi said, the parameters that you designed with HG&E, and they were set. What we were represented to by many, many parties of your government, that as long as we stay within these parameters, these projects would be approved. So here we are, hundreds of thousands of dollars later, 4 weeks before construction, and you want to change the rules. The gentleman who went before me was saying we got to have a zone change before we have a traffic study. You're saying the opposite. The reason he's saying that is for what is happening right here, right now. I have invested several $100,000 in good faith. I have pumped hundreds of thousands of dollars into local economy, legal fees, everything else. I have spoken to landowners in good faith, saying you can have a voice in this, you can do that, all under the understanding which you two were on that board. And now we're not even 2 years later, and you want to jack up the tax. It's this uncertain environment. If I had known that I had to get consensus on a pilot, that it wasn't sent, I never would have made those investments. Ever. My investors wouldn't have allowed me to. But because it was communicated by the mayor's office, which we have a signed agreement, HG&E, the planning board, everybody, including yourselves in 2013, investments were made. And I think it's highly inappropriate for you to change the rules at this time on the taxes.
We have heard your points, and your time is up. Thank you.
Well, Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
So,
Councilor Jourdain.
Yep. So first of all, I just want to make sure we get one thing clear. I did ask for your financials at the last meeting. I asked that those be released to me. You said those are proprietary. You didn't want to do it. I took the liberty of going to the Holyoke Gas and Electric and asking them for a 650 kilowatt project pro forma. Received it right here. You're welcome to have a copy, Jim Lavelle.
That's their performer, not mine. They're making
I agree,
assumptions.
and I'm stipulating to that. I am not saying that's yours. However, these are pretty smart people, and I would hope that this looks remotely like what you have. And if that's not the case, then the city's really operating with poor information. The G&E is the only legitimate authority that I can cite to for knowledge. They know a lot more about solar power than I do, and so I rely on them as my experts on the financials of these deals, okay? I also do know how to add basic numbers. 0.6 times 5,000 is 3,200. I don't think you dispute that number. So the point is on the financials of it, there's that. Now, let's go back to this notion of in April 2013, something magical happened. First of all, I want to state, as it is true, I did serve on the Finance Committee at that time. This date has been referenced. I have been unable to go back through the minutes to allege, you apparently have been given this date by somebody, that I was on this because I don't think you were on the scene, and that was 3 years ago, not 2 years ago. I will go and I will find out exhaustively what took place at that meeting, and we will bring that out on the table in terms of that information. So I don't have the April 2013 conversation, but let me just say at this point, whatever information I had in 2013 was a shadow of the knowledge that I have about this today. I am unaware of, other than the G&E projects, of any other pilots that we have approved, other than the G&E.
5 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, and that was quite a while ago. So about this long history of all these deals, and you're the guy who's the first private deal, I'm sorry that all these other entities have given you these information. If we're the authority that approves all of this, it might have been a good idea early in the process. One of the takeaways from this is, to your point, is, we should have you guys in front of us early in the process, not at the end, because if we object, then you're up the creek without a paddle. I am sensitive to that. The fact of the matter remains, though, is what is being offered financially to me is not sufficient tax-wise to offset all of the negative that comes with it. And so it's a financial decision. I've looked at the pro forma. It is not your pro forma. It is the one I've been given by my experts. And so I rely on this information, and I make a decision the best that I can. And I also listen to my constituents who feel that this is also not in their financial interest as well. So we leave it at that. And we'll see what happens with the other two as well.
There's a couple other factors that may help you.
We are not
This is-
having any further debate on this. I have given you your 2 minutes. I've been very generous. You had way in excess of it. We suspended rules and had discussion for well over an hour at our last meeting. We have a motion before us. The facts have been presented to us at the last meeting. We received this in
Today.
response to that last meeting.
Yep.
To give us the remainder of the questions that we had. I asked people to communicate with each other back and forth between the last meeting and this meeting with any remaining questions to be answered. This is not a public hearing. We've been very generous hearing from the parties involved. We have a motion before us on 3 of the 5 that we have taken up. So at this point, I'm calling for the vote on the motion. The motion before us on items 6, 8, and 10 is to deny the pilot agreement as presented.
Yep.
On the motion, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
On the other two,
We're getting to those in a minute. Stay tuned. Under discussion on, 7 and 9. Okay. Let's take those off the table for discussion before we get to a motion.
Motion to,
Just take from.
well, I need
put 'em-
they're already on the table. We
Oh, are
take them
they?
up as a
Okay.
package.
Then just
So
under
I need-
discussion then, before I
I
get to a
need a
motion.
motion so we can have a discussion, or you can discuss them before a motion.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Because I want to hear the flavor of it. Basically, my recommendation is that I could be supportive of these two. These two are in industrial zones. They are not near residents. These are the two on Babala Road. These are an animal of an entirely different stripe, in that what I find concerning is that whereas the amount of taxes to be paid, however, I am not really that comfortable at $3,200. And so I actually am in support of an amount at $10,000, which is the equivalent of what Chicopee pays for these agreements, in that would be, in my opinion, more sufficient to what they should be at. If they were at the 10,000 amount that other communities are paying for these, I think if we were to receive that kind of a pilot, it would be more in line. So I wanted to see what the appetite and discussion of the committee is on that. I would support it at 10,000, and I would like to hear what others have to think about that, but I wanted to start the discussion at that.
Well, I
should-
do not believe, and this is a point of order. I think what we have before us is an agreement. We can accept it or we cannot accept it. We can't negotiate
We
contracts.
can't amend it, we can't amend
We
it, I know.
we cannot negotiate contracts. We cannot change a monetary amount. It's just like all the financial orders that come before us. We either say yes or no.
I guess we're in a, I do 100% agree with you. There's no way we could amend it. We could deny it and send it back to the mayor for further negotiation. That's one option, or we could approve it at the 5,000. I'm going to stick with my original plan, which is I feel that the 10,000 is a much more appropriate. Chicopee is getting 10,000. They're a public utility. I think we should get the 10,000 rate versus the 5,000 rate. And I'm going to make that motion that these be denied for that reason.
Do I have a second?
Okay, so that motion fails for lack of a second.
I'll make a motion to approve the 2 pilots.
Do I have a second for that?
I will second that so we can have a vote of the city council and we'll let them decide. I'll have to make up my mind yet on those 2, items 7 and 9.
Correct.
I might be persuaded to vote in favor of that. I have not made up my mind, but I will vote them out of committee on a yes vote, and we'll see how I feel on April 5th between now and then. And, but I'm willing to give the gentleman a full council vote on that, so let's move it forward. So I'll vote yes for the adoption for 7 and 9.
So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Thank you.
There you go. Have a good day. All right, where are we at? 11? Yeah.
11, 12, and 13, the maker of the, well,
We just
one
keep-
maker of the order
I-
has
I'm
asked
in-
that they be tabled.
And I would ask, I'm in favor of keeping mine on the table since it's all the same. We should keep that as one discussion, so.
He actually asked that we table them to May because he hadn't had time to look at the language that he wanted to put.
That's fine. We can keep them
So
tabled. So
we have to,
that first meeting in May?
yeah.
Okay.
So we have to,
So, well, we'll just
So-
keep, motion to keep 11, 12, and 13 tabled, and I would, with a recommendation to the chair, if you could bring it up
I
in
think
May.
that was the 10th,
Okay, yeah, it was.
the 10th.
Okay,
It was per his request, and he was the major maker of the order, so.
he was. Yep.
Okay, so.
Take a vote on that?
All in favor?
All right, opposed, so moved. Was 16 taken care of already, or just 14, 15?
14 and 15, we took care of. Item 16, I believe Mr. Cody is here for. And we did get a communication from Chief Pond relative to that. Can I have a motion to take up item 16? So moved. Second? Kev? Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
So item 16 was filed by Counselor Sullivan, ordered that the city council review and amend section 18-35, regulations of blighted and vacant buildings, and any other sections as may be necessary. Regulations should be solicited from the mayor, building commissioner, board of health, and Holyoke Police Department.
Do we have those in front?
We have before us a communication from Chief Pond. And in his recommendation, if I can read that into the record quickly, he is recommending, in coordination, and I'm sure Commissioner Cody will talk about it further, the use of a different material that would more effectively board up the buildings, but also allow for more observation. But I will let Commissioner Cody explain that in more detail, and if we can hear from him.
Could we invite Commissioner
Sure.
Cody in to join us here?
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, David.
Do you want me to just start? Okay. So there's really three things here. There's a lot of writing, but this is giving you an idea of three things that I feel will help us either give us a better tool in terms of enforcement using our existing ordinance for blighted and vacant buildings, and or something else, which is this change in the board up method would be something better for the city as a whole. So that's the first one, and basically, there's probably nobody in here that hasn't seen a boarded up building in Holyoke. They're all wood. They have 2x4s and carriage bolts. It's set by U.S. Fire Administration standards, and that comes out of the building code. And a couple of years ago, I went to Detroit for a conference on blight. Great backdrop for it. And I seen that there were some communities across the country using polycarbonate, which is the word for plexiglass as a brand name. So there's lots of manufacturers, but all those manufacturers, what they're making is polycarbonate, which is that material there. It's in my opinion, after seeing it, it's a big upgrade. It's something that it doesn't look. You could drive right by it unless you're looking really close. Unless you're living next door, you're probably not even going to think about it. You're going to drive right by. You're not going to notice. It's a little bit more expensive. Is the only single drawback. But in terms of us having a bank do it, or if we do it with a private contractor and then recover the cost, it doesn't really make much of a difference in that sense. For example, last week I just had a house on Northeast Street boarded up, and the person came in and paid cash a week later. So, and that was about $1,700. So maybe it goes up to $1,900 or $2,000, but if we get the money back, in that way, that doesn't make a difference. So the list here is all the benefits of it. I could go through them, but I think, the list is long, but there's a lot of practical reasons why we'd rather have that. The caveat to this is it requires us to get a blessing from the fire chief, which I talked to John Pond many months ago, maybe a year ago, and brought it to his attention, and he loves it. He went to the state fire marshal. I think he sent a communication about it.
He did.
I read it. And so he's behind it, and he's going to pursue it further on a more Massachusetts-wide level. So I'll
I'm
stop
showing
on that one for now.
his
unless-
communication.
I could either go to the next one or just stop there and let you.
I think the only question I have,
I think it's
great idea, thank you for bringing this forward, is, let's just, in terms of, like, say I was a fireman and I had to crack into the window, plywood versus something like this, I'm assuming the chief has already considered that, though, obviously he's in support of this, so.
He has, and that's why I brought it to his attention, because it's not that you can't get in, it's a different kind of tool. That's all it really
Oh, I
comes
see,
down to.
okay.
That they have cutting tools on all their trucks is what I was told. So
Okay.
instead of a fire axe is probably not gonna do it to this material the way that it would through plywood or
Right.
any wood. But it's really, I don't wanna go into detail as to how to open it up.
Because they know.
Suffice it to say, it can be done. Okay, very good, all right, excellent. Number 2?
Okay, so the second one is, this is about the rehabilitation plan. So, working with Attorney Pear in the law department, we've gotten a few people in to talk about using this pre-existing ordinance to get people to move on their buildings to rehabilitate them, and that really hasn't been happening. I don't think this ordinance is that terribly old either. So we're using this as one of the tools for people that have something, they don't owe a lot of taxes, and they have something to lose by us, going after them and giving them fines and everything. So some of the things that are practical in this one is that I believe Kara told me that this was based on Springfield on some level, and so that was probably young for them too. One of the things is 180 days as a maximum time for somebody to renovate a building. I think if we have an ordinance, it should really be a practical thing. And 180 days to renovate, I'll give you the example of 276 High Street right next door to us would not be by any construction standards.
right?
Yeah, it just wouldn't happen. So if we're gonna have something, it should be something that's more realistic, and I'm more than happy. I think it's a great thing, and we have brought people in. I can't tell you that there's a success story yet. This has only been 6 months. We've really been trying to work with this. But if we get it tweaked a little bit, and the proposed language is not in stone, I would ask Kara or somebody in the law department to do a final review. But something to the effect of, I threw in there 10,000 square feet and above would be considered a work area, a large renovation, and then we should look at some kind of agreed upon extension on that. But also that we can set in stone, here's the dates, you gotta give us X, Y, and Z by this date and that date, and if you fail to, we're gonna fine you, we're gonna, tack it on as we go along, and if we have to, lien it on the property with the municipal lien charges.
Is this in the situation where somebody has a house that they're living in that has become deteriorated, or is this in the situation where people are buying the blighted properties that we're looking at tweaking this particular portion?
This, if I had to, I think it could be probably for anything. This, this doesn't specify residential, commercial, or anything.
Okay.
This is just a vacant abandoned buildings, which does include, single-family homes, but in terms of an overall strategy for 1, 2, 3 family homes that have a lot of work that needs to happen, that don't owe property taxes, receivership is a better strategy than this is. And receivership is not a strategy, not even a possibility for commercial and industrial buildings. So this is something we would use to focus on those.
Okay, thanks. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Cody?
Number 3.
And three is just the, I've probably brought this up before. I talked to Brian Fitzgerald today about it, because he gave me the list of what he's gotten for single-family homes. I think the vast majority of people paying for that are banks or management companies, and they are paying the $100 fee, but I don't think that's sufficient enough, and he agreed and thought that bumping it up to $250 would make more sense, and it has a lot of, has more to do with than just one thing. It's the fact that for somebody that doesn't pay it, the lien cost is close to that or more than that, depending the cost of what we're spending in terms of sending out the mailings and everything else, inspector time. I don't think that covers the cost for the city. So in more cases than the commercial, we're actually receiving that fee according to his paperwork. And, lastly, the appeal cost is $50. It doesn't really make a lot of sense that you're going to charge somebody $50 to appeal on a $100. There seems to be some discrepancy there. It doesn't make sense to me. So I just proposed this. I wrote this probably about 1.5 years ago, and it came out of something with more rationale than I can remember today. But I pulled it up and said, well, $250. He agreed with it, and I thought this would be a great change to have to, get from the banks basically.
Do we know how this compares to other communities? And would you see it as a way to prompt people to move the houses quicker? I mean, I know you're looking at covering costs, but usually when we're talking about these fees, we're also trying to get people to do something, right?
Yeah, and I think in the residential, the other part of this is that's a fee that's set like it says here, regardless of duration of vacancy, which we don't probably have to do that way. We could mirror the commercial or greater than 3 family category and say, and probably go up. I don't see why I wouldn't be able to. So that's not a motivator, I don't think, at all. Whether it be 100 or 250, it's not a lot of money compared to the property taxes on most residential properties. But it does allow us to take in the money and have a justification for sending inspectors to keep an eye on it. and make sure it's secure, because a lot of these management companies don't really actually manage the properties. you
So
know.
I may not be looking at this entirely the right way, but I'm thinking of the situation where an elderly person dies, the family lives out of state, the home is then vacant, but we would want to give them some time to do something with it before we find them, right?
Oh, absolutely, and I don't know how the Board of Health handles, case by case,
Yeah.
but that would make sense to me too. I mean, the goal would be not to have anybody have to pay these fees at all, and if they either needed some work and took out a building permit, I tell them all the time, hey, they have a permit, so they're working on it, they're not inactive on the property, or if they're looking to sell it, and it's actually on the market with a real estate agent, then, there's no real reason to pursue it that way. I don't think that's the case.
All right, so in terms of the place being determined or designated vacant, it would generally be 6 months or more at least?
I mean, I've seen them, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've seen them where we get a call, typically I'll get a call from a neighbor who says the grass is growing. Doesn't know
Okay.
why the grass is growing. I show up and you'd be shocked. There's people that say the house has been like that for 10 years. And it's like nobody complains, I guess. I don't know. We wouldn't know. Some of these you drive by and I'll hear that 2 neighbors are mowing the lawns. They're taking turns taking care of the
Like
house in
Dale
between.
Street.
And then on the front, you'll have a placard for a management company. So, what's happening with it, who knows? It's probably foreclosures mostly, but.
Okay. Thank you.
These abandoned houses are killing our neighborhoods, and I couldn't be more in support of this. Yeah.
Okay, anybody have any other questions? Counselor Sullivan?
Not
Counselor
questions, I
Sullivan has
just
a question.
want the committee to know that Brian Fitzgerald was here earlier.
He was.
I had a conversation with Brian, and everything he had to say was pretty much mirroring what Commissioner Cody has brought forward tonight. He was comfortable with that, and, I told him, fine.
Thank you. Okay, so change number 4?
This is, it's nothing in particular. I think there was just a couple of words. I actually have a track changes version from the website from Unicode, which always looks terrible when you cut and paste it. So I just have an add enforcement action after a sentence in here. So I have this. This, I guess we'll call it crazy idea that, someday we'll be able to actually lien a property for enforcement action beyond physical work we do on a building, so not just fines for a specific thing, or let's say we board it up and pay a contractor, they give us a bill, and then we can attach that as a lien, but that we can further look at the ordinance later on with details about how we can lien properties for enforcement action. And this goes back again to some communities I learned from at a conference where they're actually accumulating everything that the city is investing into enforcing a property. And this is really meant for some of the worst offenders that go over a year's time. So if we're doing 25 inspections over the year and we're just logging them in, and everything works out, we don't do anything. But if the property ends up, they either jump ship or decide they don't want to do anything with it, we're able to attach those enforcement action.
In addition?
Right, in addition to anything else that we already have to say, hey, we've been there 25 times this year. And if it helps speed us up to getting, a build on the property and a lien on a viable property where we can take it for taxes and then sell it, that's just another tool. It's not the answer for every case. Like, none of these are, they're options is all they are.
Thank you.
I have a motion if there's no other commentary.
I don't see any.
Oh, good. I'd like a motion that this, all 4 changes be referred to the law department to be drawn into legal form and come back to us for a vote or final review. Is that okay? Yep, okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
None opposed. If I get 3 yeses, I don't look for
Thank
the
you.
opposition.
There you go.
Thank
And
you.
here's your sample.
Thank you.
Take care.
Last but not least, item
Yes.
17, Counselor Jordan.
Yeah, make a motion to remove this from the table.
All in favor?
Aye.
Item 17, filed by Counselor Jordan, ordered that the off-street parking fee be increased to $40 per month and that the off-street hourly parking fee be increased to 35 cents per hour to a maximum of $3.50 per day.
I was asked to, the mayor had included this in the current year, the FY16 budget, I believe to the tune of about $100,000 in additional revenue. He feels that these amounts are too low currently, and they asked me to forward this for our consideration approval. The increase seems reasonable to me. It's been many, many years to put it to $40 a month to park in the lots. As you know, we've got a $7.5 million bond to pay over here for Suffolk Street. Money doesn't grow on trees, and basically the users of these things have to, in some way, some manner, help us with paying that. As far as the on-street, this is the metered rate, would go from 25 cents to 35 cents. It's been 25 cents as long as I can remember, so at least 10 years, maybe 15. We've had meters at least that long. I actually was around when we didn't have meters, to date myself. So I would say to increase the monthly parking from 20 to 40 and the meters from 25 to 35 cents seems reasonable to me at this stage of the game. So basically, I know Springfield, just because I happen to park at their meters from time to time, is 25 cents per half hour, so that'd be 50 cents an hour. So this is still cheaper than that. So for us to charge 35 cents per hour, I think is really reasonable. I think 25 cents an hour is, half kind of the going rate. And the parking garages, a month of parking for $40. I mean, it's been 20 for a really, really long time. And they feel that this will generate about $100,000 a year in revenue. And therefore, I think it's reasonable. And so I would make a motion that it be adopted. But, I'll pull back on that to have discussion.
We have a motion on the table. I mean, if there's a second, it's on the table. Second. Okay. And we can have discussion. Does anybody want to be heard?
Sure.
Counselor McGivern.
First, I have to declare I am not a monthly parking rate currently. I haven't been for some time because the McGiverns only have one car. But I think Kevin's correct in saying that it's been a long time, and this has been necessary, not just with the bonding, but I think with overall inflation and what's going on. But there's three areas I'd just like to ask for consideration and some tweaking. One is, and the good mayor, and all the department heads get free parking along with the clerical union in City Hall. Now, that's fine. I don't have an issue with that. However, on a budgetary point of view, I've always said the city should be accounting for that and not making this hourly rate on the people who work downtown pay for the employees of the city of Holyoke. There should be some budget accounting for that and something in the budget that offsets what they give out in free parking passes to City Hall and City Hall Annex employees. I've said that many times and it's never happened. Secondly, when we did this original plan, the on-street parking meter was very carefully designed to be less expensive than the parking deck. And the parking deck has hourly rates too, one parking deck. No, I'm sorry, both parking decks have hourly rates. And the reason for that is we want the people on the street to be the customers of downtown, the people who are coming downtown to look for services, to spend their money retail, to spend their money in a restaurant, to be here. And the people who work downtown if they don't need a monthly parking pass, that it makes more sense to go into the deck anyways and not to stay on the street. Unfortunately, we also designed, there's a 2-hour limit when you use a meter on the street. It's virtually impossible to enforce. Even if it's there for a deterrent, it's very hard. Even if the ticket is issued, the ticket can easily be challenged after 2 hours. And what I hate to see is, and some of it already happens, is employees of downtown taking advantage of just feeding the meter for 7.5 hours, which is, I think we have to be careful of. The only other thing I ask you to consider is that the numbers aren't terrible, but the 100% jump from 20 to 40 to some people would be a financial burden, so to speak. And if we could do this in increments, I think it would help out some people.
Like
So-
10 now, 10,
Like
10 in a
30
year.
Yeah,
to start.
something like that,
10
yeah.
now, 10 in a year.
10 in a year, yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
But the big one is, the city should be putting some money into it. I mean, we are, because we're
Well,
paying for the bond.
exactly.
But there should be some accounting for it in the budget.
Thank you. Anybody else have any comments?
I'm sensitive to, I could do the 30 and, I was asked to advance this, but, maybe that is, $10 a month, $20 a month. That is, it is an increase. It is significant. So, why don't we do $10, so to 30 now, or, we'll pick a date, because you gotta give some people some notice. So we'll make, today is now what? So let's say May 1st, because by the time we actually pass all of this, right? Or June 1st or something, And then, how about we do it for June 1st? That'll give people
the
sufficient.
$30?
For the $30. And then on, June 1st of 2017, go to $40. So I'll amend my motion to that. We'll do the 35 cents and also on June 1st. So all the changes, they'll be able to put notice out to everybody.
So that is the meter rate that we're talking
Yeah.
about there? And how,
I heard, Kevin, what you said too, but it reads different on the agenda.
it
It says
says
35 is,
35 cents per hour.
yeah, but
For the-
there's a difference of, there's an hourly rate of off-street, which is the parking decks, and there's an hourly rate of the on-street meters. And this reads,
This is the decks, I think.
yeah, this reads off-street.
I think this is
It
the
doesn't
decks.
say anything about on-street.
You're right.
I don't think it's addressing the meters.
I thought they wanted a meter increase, though. Well, okay, so
This
for
is
people
just
that
the
aren't.
decks, right?
So just the decks, so we'll put the, okay, so this is all just the decks, you're right. Apparently they didn't put the meter portion in there, you're correct. So, all right, 35 cents an hour, and that'll take effect June 1st of 16.
And just because I wasn't
So that's
paying
if you just come in
attention,
for an hour
Does
and then-
that keep it in the relationship that you were referring to, Counselor McGivern? Okay.
But the 2-hour increment is the part that would, the 2-hour cap of parking is what would really work, but it's very hard to enforce.
You mean in
But
terms of
if
the
you-
meters?
If you put a quarter in a meter on street now, you get, I think, not even a half hour. So I think it's like 75 cents an hour. Or it might be not quite that much, but it's enough to make you think.
Well, I'll just make my little editorial comment. In Northampton, everybody parks in the garages because if you stay 1 minute over on a meter, you get a ticket. And that meter costs you a heck of a lot more than the garage.
Right.
So if we did have robust enforcement, everybody would use the
Hey,
garage.
all their parking meters work. We don't have red bags over saying
True.
you can't
Correct.
park because they're not working.
Correct, but I'll tell you, it is, you know how every city or town has its reputation? Everybody feeds the meter in Northampton.
All right, so for the
So-
benefit of people who have to draft this, particularly Kara, and for Ryan, who's gonna prepare this, so we'll be clear that meters, that was incorrect.
It's
That
all
it's
on the
the
decks.
off-street hourly, just for the decks, is gonna be 35 cents an hour. That's on June 1st, 2016. And the off-street monthly parking fee will be $30 on June 1st, 2016, $40 on June 1st, 17. So that's my amendment.
That's your amendment, and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
So, on the amended motion, we need to,
I make a
motion to approve.
I make a motion that we
We're all getting to-
put into legal form and that it be adopted as amended.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye. Thank you, council members.